She said 4 words that should have destroyed Nadia Reeves completely. This isn't what it looks like. Sienna Vale, the woman who had been Nadia's closest friend for 11 years, stood in Nadia's own bedroom, in Nadia's own apartment, beside Nadia's own fiancé, and had the breathtaking audacity to say those words with a straight face. Nadia was still holding the 2 handcrafted coffees she had stopped to pick up on the way home. One for her, one for Caleb. A small surprise, the kind she had been doing for years because she believed in the accumulation of small kindnesses inside a relationship. She stood in that doorway for exactly 4 seconds. Then she set both coffees on the dresser, and she gave them 20 minutes to leave her home. If you have ever stood in a doorway and watched your entire future rearrange itself in silence, this story is for you. Because what Nadia did next is something most people never talk about. She didn't fall apart. She didn't beg. She picked up the pieces of her life and built something so extraordinary that 6 years later, one of the most feared men on the Pacific coast would choose to dismantle his own empire just to be worthy of standing beside her. Before we go further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now, because we tell stories like this every single week. Stories about real human choices, real consequences, and what people are capable of when everything falls apart. Drop your city or country in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. And if you stay until the very end of part 5, I promise you, the final scene is worth every minute. Now, let's go back to Seattle. Let's go back to that doorway. And let's talk about the moment Nadia Reeves's real life began. The coffees were still warm when Caleb Mercer finally walked out of the bedroom with his shoes untied and his collar crooked, looking like a man who had been interrupted mid-sentence rather than mid-betrayal. He didn't look at Nadia's face. He looked at the wall behind her left shoulder, the way people look when they are calculating how much they can still salvage. Nadia recognized that look. She had seen it during failed contract negotiations and panicked vendor calls and every other moment in her professional life when someone realized they had overplayed their hand. She had just never expected to see it on the face of the man she was supposed to marry in 4 months. Sienna came out behind him. She had put her hair up, which struck Nadia as one of the strangest details, the deliberateness of it, the way Sienna had taken the time to fix her appearance before walking out, as if maintaining composure mattered more than anything she had just done to the person standing 5 feet away. Sienna was wearing a cream-colored blouse that Nadia recognized because she had been standing right next to Sienna in the store when Sienna bought it. 2 years of friendship rendered visible in a single garment. No, not 2 years. 11. Nadia had known Sienna since their second week of college, when they had ended up in the same campus laundry room at 2 in the morning and discovered they both hated the same professor and loved the same obscure late-night diner 3 blocks off campus. They had been through roommates and breakups and job losses and cross-country moves. Nadia had flown to Phoenix to sit with Sienna after Sienna's mother had a health scare 3 years ago. She had done it without being asked. She had simply booked the flight and shown up. That was the woman standing in Nadia's hallway, trying not to make eye contact. Nadia, Sienna started. 20 minutes, Nadia said. Her own voice surprised her. It was completely flat. Not controlled flat, the way a line goes flat on a monitor when the signal disappears entirely. She didn't recognize the sound of it. She thought distantly that she should probably be screaming, and she wasn't sure why she wasn't. We should talk, Caleb said. You have 19 minutes and 40 seconds. He opened his mouth, closed it. He was 34 years old, charming enough to fill any room he walked into, and he had just run out of words. Nadia noted this, the way. She noted everything in a crisis clinically, with a part of her brain that was still working even while the rest of her was doing something she could not yet name. Sienna touched Caleb's arm. The gesture was so casual, so intimate, so completely comfortable that Nadia's stomach turned over once, slowly, like a stone being rolled in deep water. That was when she understood the thing that was somehow worse than the act itself. This was not the first time. That kind of casual touch didn't grow overnight. That kind of ease between 2 people took time. How long, Nadia said. It wasn't quite a question. Caleb looked at the floor. Nadia, how long, Caleb? A pause that lasted too long. Sienna's fingers tightened slightly on his sleeve and then relaxed. And that small movement told Nadia everything before he answered. 4 months, he said. The number sat in the air between them. 4 months ago, Nadia had been planning a wedding. 4 months ago, she had been choosing between 2 different invitation designs with Sienna sitting across from her at her kitchen table, laughing about fonts. 4 months ago, she had begun quietly suspecting she might be pregnant and had been carrying that knowledge around like something fragile and terrifying, waiting for the right moment, the right conversation, the right certainty. She had not yet found the right certainty. The test was still in her purse. The positive test, with its little parallel lines that had made her sit down on her bathroom floor that morning and press both hands flat against the tile. Caleb did not know. She had planned to tell him this week. Now Nadia stood in her hallway, doing a kind of mathematics she had never done before, calculating backward across 4 months of dinners and conversations and phone calls and quiet evenings, looking for the seams, the gaps, the places where the lie had been stitched in so carefully she had walked right over it without ever noticing the texture change beneath her feet. Was this the only? Stopped. Is she the only one? The pause before he answered was its own answer. Nadia nodded once, slowly, the way a person nods when they receive information they already suspected but had not yet allowed themselves to fully believe. Okay, she said. Nadia, please. Just let me. I said, okay, Caleb. She looked at him directly for the first time. 14 minutes. He grabbed his jacket. Sienna took her bag from the chair by the door, a chair Nadia had specifically chosen because it was good for dropping things when you came home, tired. A piece of furniture she had selected with care because she had been building a life in that apartment, building it room by room, piece by piece, into something she thought belonged to both of them. Sienna paused at the door. For one terrible moment, Nadia thought she was going to say something meaningful. Something that would crack the surface of this and let something human out. An apology. An explanation. Even an accusation would have been anything that acknowledged that Sienna understood the size of what she had done. Instead, Sienna said, I hope you'll be okay. Nadia didn't answer. The door closed, and Nadia stood in the silence of her apartment, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of Seattle rain beginning against the window, the muffled city noise from 5 floors below, and she waited to fall apart. She waited for a full minute. It didn't happen. She walked to the kitchen, poured both coffees down the sink, and rinsed the cups. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and put her purse in front of her and looked at it for a long time before she reached inside and took out the pregnancy test. She set it on the table. She looked at it. The refrigerator hummed. Her phone buzzed once. Caleb. She turned it face down. There was a version of this night where she called him back, where she told him about the 2 parallel lines and watched the conversation become something else, entirely messy, more complicated, tangled up with obligation and guilt and the particular kind of control that information gives one person over another. She could feel that version pulling at her like an undertow. The version where she handed him the leverage to come back. The version where she let what he did to her become something he could fix by staying. She sat with her hands flat on the table, on either side of the test, and she thought about her mother, who had stayed with a man who didn't deserve staying for, because leaving required a courage her mother hadn't been able to locate at the time. She thought about the 2 years after her mother finally left, when everything was harder and smaller and more frightening, and also, in a way that took years to articulate, more honest. She thought about herself at 16, swearing silently that she would never make her children watch her negotiate with someone who had already decided she wasn't worth the truth. Nadia picked up the test. She put it in the pocket of her jacket. She went to the window and looked out at Seattle in the rain. And she made 2 decisions, the kind that don't feel like decisions at the time because they don't arrive with drama or fanfare, but simply settle into place like furniture being moved to where it was always supposed to go. First, Caleb would not be told about this baby. Second, whatever happened next would happen on her terms. She did not call Caleb back that night or the next night. or the night after that. His messages moved from confused to apologetic to wounded to desperate to silent over the course of 3 weeks, and she watched the arc of them with the detached attention of someone watching weather systems move across a forecast map. She did not respond to Sienna's single text, 4 sentences, carefully constructed, that managed to be both an apology and an explanation of why the situation was complicated in ways Nadia apparently did not understand. Nadia deleted the text without responding. She made a doctor's appointment. She called her accountant. She began the grim administrative work of extracting her life from the shared financial structures she and Caleb had been quietly building toward marriage, the joint accounts they'd discussed, the lease they had been considering co-signing, the business contacts who knew them as a unit. There was an attorney named Marlo Hart who had helped Nadia negotiate her first major consulting contract 3 years ago, a woman who had the particular gift of delivering difficult information in complete sentences without softening it into meaninglessness. Nadia called Marlo. "I need to untangle some things," Nadia said. "How complicated?" Marlo asked. "And I need it done quietly." "Come in Friday." Nadia came in Friday. She was 8 weeks pregnant and she had told no one. She discovered during a brutally honest 90-minute session with Marlo, more financially entangled with Caleb than she had fully realized, not because of anything criminal, but because relationships accumulate practical dependency, the way old houses accumulate renovation projects, slowly, invisibly, until you try to move and discover how much weight has been quietly distributed into the walls. The process of separating took 6 weeks. Caleb, to his credit, did not make it difficult in the way Nadia had steeled herself for. He was cooperative and confused, and occasionally pathetic in the way people come when they realize that the person they wronged has moved past part of grief that still involves them. He called one final time, a Tuesday in November, and she answered because she was in the mood to be finished with it. "I just want to understand," he said. "Understand what, Caleb?" Why you don't want to try. Because trying requires trust," Nadia said. "And you spent 4 months making sure I don't have any of that left." "People make mistakes, Nadia. I know what I did was wrong, but I love you. And I know you love me," she said. And she meant it, which was somehow the most complicated part. "But you also loved yourself more. And that's not something I can talk you out of." He went quiet. "Goodbye, Caleb." She hung up. She sat for a moment in the quiet of her apartment, a different apartment now. Smaller, more modest, half her things still in boxes because she hadn't had the energy to unpack everything and put her hand flat against her stomach, which was just barely beginning to change shape in a way that only she would know how to notice. "Okay," she said, to no one, to both of them, to whatever came next. Her pregnancy was difficult in the way that unplanned, unsupported, financially uncertain pregnancies tend to be, not dramatically, not cinematically, but persistently. Her second trimester coincided with the loss of 2 major consulting clients who had been connected to Caleb through networking events she had attended as his partner. The loss wasn't malicious. Caleb had not orchestrated it, but it was real, and it hit her income at precisely the moment her expenses were beginning their climb. She worked more. She slept less. She developed a system for her workdays that was efficient to the point of being inhuman 90-minute focus blocks with no phone, client calls scheduled in clusters so her concentration could stay assembled. Billing reviewed every Sunday night so she never had to experience the particular terror of financial surprises. She ate well because she was not the only one eating, and she went to her prenatal appointments alone and told the nurses that yes, she had support at home, because she was technically not lying. She had her neighbor Mrs. Kaminsky, who was 71 and sharp as a tack, and had raised 4 children and had begun appearing at Nadia's door with small containers of food with the reliable frequency of someone who understood without being told. Nadia did not ask for help. Mrs. Kaminsky gave it anyway. This was how Nadia discovered that some people in your life don't need to be asked. They just show up and keep showing up, and the consistency of their presence turns out to be more sustaining than any single grand gesture. She filed this away. She would remember it later, when she was building something that required understanding what people actually needed versus what they said they needed. Her son arrived 6 weeks early. She was working at her kitchen table on a Thursday evening, a proposal deadline for a small hotel consulting project, something that would pay 3 months of rent if she landed it. When the first contraction hit, and she sat very still for 30 seconds, trying to decide if it was what she thought it was. The second one, 12 minutes later, confirmed it. She called a cab. She left her laptop open on the table. She grabbed her hospital bag from the closet, packed at 33 weeks, because she was, in all things, practical, and she locked her apartment and rode to the hospital alone and checked herself in at the front desk and told them her name and her due date and that things appeared to be progressing ahead of schedule. Elias Reeves was born at 2:47 in the morning. He weighed 4 pounds, 11 ounces. He was immediately taken to the NICU and placed in an incubator where monitors measured the rhythm of his breathing with a consistency that should have been reassuring and was, instead, the most frightening thing Nadia had ever seen in her life. She sat beside that incubator for the first 6 hours, in a state that was not quite fear and not quite hope, but something in between, a kind of suspended, wide-awake stillness that she would later recognize as the state she entered whenever the stakes were too high to afford the energy of emotion. She brought her laptop the next day. She worked beside his incubator. She answered client emails. She revised the hotel proposal. She took calls in the hallway when necessary, speaking in the clear, unhurried voice she used for professional situations, returning to Elias's side within minutes of each call's end. The nurses did not comment on the laptop. They seemed to understand, with the particular perception of people who work in environments defined by precarious lives, that the working was not a sign of detachment, but its opposite, that Nadia worked beside her son's incubator because she could not afford to stop working. And she could not afford to stop working because the thing inside that incubator needed her to keep it together. 17 days. That was how long Elias spent in the NICU before a nurse with kind eyes and a direct manner sat down across from Nadia and told her, in clear and uncomplicated language, that her son was going to be fine. Nadia thanked her. She gathered her things. She took the elevator down. She walked into the parking garage, found the concrete pillar closest to her car, put her back against it, slid down until she was sitting on the cold ground, and cried for approximately 4 minutes, with a completeness and an abandon that she had not permitted herself since the moment she had opened that bedroom door. 4 minutes. Then she stood up. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her jacket. She went back upstairs because her son was waiting. And Nadia Reeves was done waiting for people to stay. The months that followed were not a recovery. Nadia never thought of them that way. Recovery implied returning to something that had existed before, and she had no interest in returning. What she was doing was different. She was building forward, not backward, and the distinction mattered to her even on the days when it felt like semantics. Elias came home at 8 weeks. He was small and ferociously alert, watching everything with dark, serious eyes that reminded Nadia, disconcertingly, of her own reflection. She set up her work around his schedule with the same systematic attention she brought to everything. Nap times became work windows. Evenings became research time. Her kitchen table became her office, and her office existed in a state of productive chaos that she managed with the same precision she brought to client projects because the inability to tolerate chaos was a luxury she could not currently afford. She had a dream. It had existed before Caleb, actually. In her early 20s, before she had gone the corporate route, before the promotions and the consulting pivot, there had been a version of her future that involved a café. Something small and specific, something that was hers, in the particular way that places can be yours when you have built them from nothing, when every decision inside them reflects a choice you made rather than a convention you inherited. She had let the dream go quiet when other things got louder. Now, in the particular silence of single parenthood, she let herself look at it again. She began researching, not dreaming. Researching. The distinction mattered. She read everything she could find about independent cafe economics failure rates, lease structures, equipment costs, supplier relationships, staffing ratios, margin realities. She built spreadsheets in the evenings. She talked to 3 cafe owners she had met through consulting work, asking questions they had never been asked before. Questions that came from someone who understood business structure, but was honest about what she didn't know. She applied for small business loans. She was rejected 4 times across 14 months. Not all for the same reasons, which was useful. Each rejection came with information, and Nadia treated information the way a carpenter treats good wood, not as something to be mourned, but as material to work with. The 5th application, 2.5 years after Elias's birth, was approved. It was not a large loan. It was enough. She found a storefront in Pioneer Square that had been 3 different businesses in 4 years, the particular history that most people saw as a bad sign and that Nadia saw as a negotiating advantage. The space had good bones, terrible lighting, and a landlord who was tired of vacancy and willing to talk. She negotiated the lease herself, with Marlowe reviewing the contract afterward, and she signed her name at the bottom of 17 pages, with the pen she had used to sign every significant document of her adult professional life, a boring, practical pilot G2 that she refused to be sentimental about and was absolutely sentimental about. She named the cafe Ember and Pine. She did not post about it on social media before it opened. She did not throw an opening party. She turned the lights on at 6:45 on a Tuesday morning in March, put the chairs down from the tables, started the espresso machine, and opened the door. 3 people came in that first morning. She remembered all 3 of them for years. The first year nearly took everything, not in a way that made a good story. In a way that made Nadia lie awake at 2 in the morning doing arithmetic in her head, subtracting from a number that was already too small. The espresso machine developed a fault during the 4th week that required emergency repair and ate a month's profit margin. Her first barista quit without notice during the 5th week, and Nadia worked open to close for 11 consecutive days while running ad listings on her phone between customers. A supplier switched terms on her without warning during the 3rd month, and she had to rebuild that relationship or find a replacement in the same 48-hour window that Elias had an ear infection and her childcare arrangement had temporarily collapsed. She solved every problem, not gracefully, not quickly, not without cost, but she solved them. And slowly, over the course of that first year, something began to happen that Nadia had calculated for intellectually, but had not been fully prepared for. Emotionally, people started coming back, not because they had to, not because she was the only option, but because something about the place, the quality of the coffee, yes, but also something harder to name, something about the particular atmosphere of a space built by someone who meant every decision in it made them want to return. Regulars became community. Community became something Nadia could build on. She hired good people and paid them as well as she could, and treated them with the specific dignity of a person who understood what it felt like to have your employer treat you like a problem to be managed. She expanded the menu with care. She bought better equipment when the numbers allowed and not a day before. She opens it 6 days a week and protected Sundays for Elias with the consistency of someone who understood that some things, once compromised, cannot be fully recovered. Ember and Pine survived its first year, then its second. Then Caleb walked through the door. She saw him from behind the counter. She recognized his particular way of standing in an unfamiliar doorway, that slight hesitation before committing to the space, the habit of assessing a room before entering it fully, which she had found attractive once, and now simply registered as familiar. He looked older, not badly, just more worn, the way people get when time costs them something real. He was wearing a jacket she didn't recognize, which was a small thing, and shouldn't have mattered and did. He ordered a black coffee. Nadia made it herself, because that was what she did. She didn't hide behind her staff, didn't step into the back to avoid the conversation. She made the coffee, set it on the counter, named the price, took his card, handed him his change. Professional, clean, correct. He stood at the counter, turning the cups slowly in his hands, looking around the cafe at the warm light, the worn wood tables she had refinished herself one weekend while Elias slept at Mrs. Kaminsky's, the hand-lettered menu board, The small things everywhere that added up to a place that felt like someone's specific vision. "You built all this?" he said. She met his eyes. "Yes." He nodded slowly. He looked like he was working up to something, some sentence, some reopening, some attempt at a door she had closed years ago. She watched him work up to it and not quite get there. He left without finishing his coffee. She poured the rest down the drain. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel sad. She felt mostly like a person who had just confirmed a piece of information she had already known. She went back to work. And then, several weeks later, on a rain-gray Tuesday morning that started like every other, a man she had never seen before sat down at the corner table by the window, ordered a single espresso, and stayed for 2 hours without looking at his phone once. His name was Jun Seo Kang, and nothing about the way he sat there was anything other than what he appeared to be, a quiet, well-dressed man with good posture and the specific patience of someone who had learned, somewhere along the way, that the most valuable thing in any room was rarely the loudest thing in it. He came back the next day, and the day after that, and Nadia, who had spent 6 years building her survival on the bedrock of her own judgment, noticed him the way she noticed everything that mattered quietly, with her full attention, without letting on that she was paying attention at all. She had no idea what was coming. None of them did. Jun Seo Kang was not the kind of man who explained himself. That was the first thing Nadia noticed, not his clothes, though they were precise in the way that suggested money that didn't need to announce itself, and not his face, which was composed in the particular stillness of someone who had learned early that expressions were information, and information was leverage. What she noticed was the absence of performance. He sat at the corner table by the window, drank his espresso without theatrics, and looked out at the rain-soaked street with the patience of a man who was not waiting for anything specific, but was, in the meantime, entirely present. Most of her regulars performed something. The young professionals performed busyness. The older retirees performed contentment. The students performed suffering. Even the people she liked most in her café had a slight quality of audience awareness, the mild self-consciousness of being seen in a public space. Jun didn't have it. He came back on Wednesday, then Thursday. By Friday, Nadia's barista Rosa had noticed. "Corner table is back," Rosa said, not quite quietly enough, refilling the milk pitchers with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing this long enough to make the work invisible. "I see him," Nadia said. "You going to go say something?" "I'm going to make his espresso," Nadia said. "That's what I do." Rosa smiled at the milk pitcher. She was 26, and perceptive enough to know when her boss was being deliberately boring about something interesting, and wise enough to let it go. On his second week of coming in, June ordered a different drink, a cortado, requested without excessive specification, which Nadia registered as a good sign, in the way that hospitality professionals register small signals of genuine taste versus performance. He didn't ask her to make it a particular way. He didn't have requirements. He simply named the drink and waited. When she set it down, he looked up. "Thank you," he said. Not perfunctory, not the reflex gratitude of someone going through the social motions. He meant it, which was strange, because it was a small thing that people routinely thanked each other for without meaning it, and the fact that he meant it made the ordinary transaction briefly strange. "Sure," Nadia said. She went back behind the counter. She did not think about him for the rest of the shift, or if she did, she filed the thinking under the category of professional observation and left it there. He was there the following Tuesday when Elias's after-school program had an early release, and Nadia had not been able to arrange alternate pickup in time, which meant that at 3:15, a small and extremely serious 5-year-old appeared in the cafe doorway, wearing a backpack that was slightly too big for him and scanning the room with his mother's exact expression of methodical assessment. Nadia came out from behind the counter. "Hey, Bug." She crouched to his level. "How was the day?" "Fine," Elias said, in the tone of someone who had developed opinions about the word fine. "Marcus took my pencil and then said he didn't. Did you get it back?" "Eventually." "Good." She stood, took his hand. "You're going to sit at the small table near the back and do your reading, okay? I'll be done in 2 hours." Can I have a cookie after you finish your reading? Elias considered this negotiation and found the terms acceptable. He followed her to the back table, settled in with the specific industriousness of a child performing effort for an audience, and opened his book. He lasted approximately 4 minutes before he began swiveling in his chair. The chair swiveled in the direction of the window table, in the direction of June, who was reading something on his phone with the same contained stillness that Elias' restlessness apparently found interesting enough to study. Nadia watched from behind the counter, prepared to intervene, as Elias pushed his chair further in the direction of curiosity. June became aware of being watched. He looked up, found the small person examining him with total frankness, and did not perform surprise or exaggerated warmth. He simply looked back. "Your book upside down," Elias informed him. John looked at his phone. "You're right," he said. "Thank you." This response, its complete lack of condescension, its absence of the slightly too loud adult cheerfulness that children detected and resented, appeared to satisfy something in Elias's assessment. He nodded once, with the gravity of someone confirming a hypothesis, and turned back to his own book. Nadia had watched the entire exchange while pretending to arrange cups. That evening, after she had locked up and walked Elias home and gotten him through the bath and the story and the specific negotiation over lights out that had become their nightly ritual, she sat at her kitchen table with her accounting spreadsheet open in front of her and found herself thinking about the way June had simply looked back at her son without any of the usual performance. She closed the spreadsheet. She went to bed. She did not think about it further. Or she tried not to. He started coming in 4 times a week, sometimes 5. He learned the patterns of the café, the way a person learns the rhythms of a place they intend to stay, not all at once, but through accumulated presence, through small adjustments that suggested awareness. He arrived after the morning rush and left before the lunch surge. He never occupied a table during peak hours without buying enough to justify the space. He never used the counter as a place to have long conversations with staff when other customers needed service. These were things Nadia noticed because she noticed everything in her cafe, and because she had been in hospitality long enough to understand that how a person treats a service environment tells you things about them that direct conversation never would. One Thursday in November, 2 months after he had first appeared, June was still at his table when Nadia was doing the end-of-day prep, the mechanical winding down that she did herself most nights, wiping surfaces, running the final numbers, going over the next day's inventory in her head. The last staff member had clocked out. It was just the 2 of them. "We're closing," she said, not unkindly. "I know." He gathered his things with the unhurried efficiency of a man who had simply lost track of time, which she somehow doubted, though she couldn't have said why. "I apologize for keeping you. It's fine." He put on his coat, a good coat, charcoal gray, the kind that had been chosen for durability rather than statement, and walked toward the door. He paused. "This is a good place," he said. Nadia looked up from the counter. "I know." Something shifted slightly in his expression. Not quite a smile, more like the recognition of a person who doesn't waste words on false modesty and finds that quality worth noting. "Good night," he said. "Night," she said. He left. Rosa appeared the next morning with the specific energy of someone who had been holding a question since the previous evening. "Did you finally talk to Corner Table?" "I told him we were closing." "That's not what I mean, and you know it." Nadia handed her the daily prep list. "There are 18 things on that list, and we open in 40 minutes. Rosa took the list. She was smiling. She said nothing further, which was what made her such a good employee. 3 weeks later, June and Nadia had their first real conversation. It started over a question she hadn't expected. She had come out from the back with a delivery invoice she needed to check against the last order, and she was frowning at the numbers in the way she frowned at all numbers until they behaved. And Jun, who was at his table, said, without preamble, "Supplier problem." She looked up. "Excuse me, that expression." He nodded at the paper. "I've seen it before. Something's off in the invoice." Nadia lowered the paper slightly. "You know about supplier invoicing?" "I know about shipping," he said. "It's not entirely different." She considered him. He was not offering to help. He was not inserting himself. He was simply making an observation and leaving it in the space between them to be picked up or left alone, entirely at her discretion. She walked to his table and set the invoice down. He studied it for about 30 seconds. Your freight surcharge changed. Did your supplier notify you? No. They should have. It's a material change in terms. He tapped the number. You have grounds to push back. Nadia looked at the figure. He was right. She had known something was wrong and had not yet identified exactly what. What kind of shipping, she asked. International freight. Pacific routes primarily. She filed this piece of information where she filed everything carefully, without immediate conclusion, available for later assembly. Thanks, she said. Of course. She picked up the invoice and went back to the counter and called her supplier and had a 12-minute conversation that resulted in a credit to her next invoice. When she looked up afterward, Jun was watching her with an expression she was beginning to identify as his version of approval minimal, contained, entirely genuine. After that, they talked. Not all at once. Not with the forced warmth of people trying to establish connection. In the particular incremental way of two reserved people who have recognized in each other a preference for quality over volume brief exchanges that became longer exchanges. Professional observations that edged carefully toward personal ones, questions asked and answered with the specific precision of two people who were not in the habit of saying more than they meant. She learned that he had grown up in Seattle, the only child of Korean immigrants who had built a shipping business from nothing during a period when that required a specific and exhausting combination of excellence and endurance. That his father had died when June was 29, leaving him the business and the debts and the particular loneliness of inheriting someone's life's work before you have fully established your own. That he had spent the decade since rebuilding Seo Meridian into something that looked, on paper and in practice, like a model of Pacific Coast logistics success. He's learned that she had come to Pioneer Square because the rent made the numbers work and she had stayed, because the neighborhood had the quality of a place that rewarded loyalty. That she had a son named Elias, who was in first grade and had strong opinions about breakfast food, and was currently in a phase of asking questions about dinosaurs that she could not always answer accurately. That she had started this business without a partner, and intended to keep it that way, not out of stubbornness, but out of a considered understanding of her own risk tolerance. She did not tell him about Caleb. He did not ask. This too, she noted. The absence of the question. Most people, upon learning she had a young child and ran a business alone, defaulted to a version of the same inquiry phrased differently, approached from different angles, but pointing at the same thing. June never pointed at it. He took what she offered and did not reach for more. It was, she would think later, one of the most respectful things anyone had done for her in years, though at the time she simply registered it as unusual. Elias, for his part, had decided that June was acceptable. This was no small thing. Elias had opinions about the adults in his world with the quiet intensity of a child who had spent his early life in the specific environment of his mother's café, surrounded by adults, observant of them, accustomed to assessing them with a lack of sentiment that was probably the product of watching his mother do the same thing for years. He had decided that Mrs. Kaminsky was excellent. He had decided that Rosa was good. He had decided that 3 of Nadia's previous suppliers were, in his words, weird, a characterization that turned out to be surprisingly accurate upon closer examination. About June, Elias said, he doesn't act different when you're not looking. Nadia was cutting an apple at the kitchen counter. She paused. What do you mean? Elias was at the table, working his way through a worksheet. Some of the men who come to the cafe, they act nice when you're there, and then when you walk away their face changes. He said this with the dispassionate reportage of a documentarian. He doesn't do that. Nadia looked at her son for a moment. Good observation, she said. I know, said Elias, and went back to his worksheet. In January of what would be Ember and Pine's 4th year, Nadia won a regional hospitality award. It was not the biggest award she could have won, but it was legitimate, decided by a committee with actual industry credibility, and it recognized the specific combination of product quality and community building that she had been pursuing since day one. A journalist came to the cafe and wrote a piece about it. The piece was good, not fawning, not condescending, but the kind of writing that got the actual story right, which was that Ember and Pine was not interesting because of any single dramatic fact, but because it was the accumulation of thousands of small correct decisions made by a person who cared deeply about every one of them. The piece ran on a Thursday. By Saturday, foot traffic was noticeably up. By the following Wednesday, Nadia was looking at the most profitable week Ember and Pine had ever had. She told Rosa. Rosa told the other staff. They had a quiet celebration, nothing dramatic, just good coffee and the particular warmth of a group of people who had worked through the hard years together and were now being given the empirical confirmation that it had been worth it. Jun came in that Saturday and simply said, "Congratulations." Nothing more. No performance of enthusiasm, no elaboration on what it meant or why she deserved it. Just congratulations. She thanked him. He nodded. He ordered his cortado. She made it. Somewhere on the other side of Seattle, Sienna Vale was reading the article on her phone. Nadia did not know this. She was at the counter, looking at her best week's numbers, thinking about whether the revenue could support a second espresso machine in time for the summer surge. She did not know that Sienna had been watching her Instagram for 18 months, that she had read every mention of Ember and Pine she could find, that something about Nadia's continued existence, the particular kind of public, visible upward trajectory of Nadia's continued existence, had been working on Sienna like a splinter that couldn't be located but could always be felt. Nadia didn't know any of it. She was thinking about coffee machines. The first sign appeared in the third week after the article ran. A one-star review on a platform Nadia monitored. The review described a food safety issue that, specifically and categorically, had not occurred. Nadia ran a kitchen with documentation rigorous enough to satisfy a health inspector arriving without notice, which health inspectors did twice a year, and she had never received anything other than a clean report. The review was detailed in a way that suggested either genuine experience or significant research into what a plausible complaint might look like. Nadia flagged it to the platform and responded professionally. She noted her inspection records. She kept her tone neutral and factual. The review stayed up. 3 days later, another appeared. Different platform, different username, different specific complaint, but with the same underlying architecture, detailed, plausible, written with the authority of someone describing a real experience, while describing something that had not happened. Noah Pierce noticed before Nadia did. He was 22, had been with her for 8 months, and had the particular combination of digital nativity and cafe loyalty. That meant he spent more time tracking Ember and Pine's online presence than Nadia had the bandwidth to. He printed out the reviews and brought them to her on a Tuesday morning before the rush, setting them on the counter with the careful gravity of someone delivering bad news they had thought about carefully before deciding to deliver. "There are 6, he said. 3 platforms, 4 different usernames, but..." He pointed these to use a phrase I've seen before. Nadia looked. He had highlighted it in yellow. A specific combination of words describing a particular kind of service failure that was unusual enough that its verbatim repetition across 2 allegedly independent reviews was statistically interesting. She stared at it. "Where else have you seen it?" she said. Noah pulled out a second sheet. It was a screenshot, old, low resolution, from a public social media post at least 4 years back. The phrase appeared in a comment. The account name was visible. Nadia looked at the account name. Then she looked at the small profile photo beside it. It was small and old enough to require scrutiny, but it was recognizable. She knew that face. She had known it since she was 19 years old, in a campus laundry room at 2 in the morning. For a moment, the cafe went very quiet around her. Not actually the espresso machine was running. A customer was ordering at the counter. Rosa was laughing at something, but in the particular interior way that spaces go quiet when your nervous system receives information of a certain size. "Nadia?" Noah said. She put the papers down. "Thank you, Noah," she said. Her voice came out exactly as she intended it to. "I need to make some calls." Can you handle the floor for the next hour? Yeah, of course. I'm fine, she said. Thank you. She went to the back office. She closed the door. She sat down in the chair behind her desk, the same desk where she had signed supplier contracts and done payroll and balanced books for 4 years. And she put both hands flat on the surface and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Again. The feeling that moved through her was not panic. It was not even primarily anger, though the anger was there, dense and specific, with the particular quality of a fury that had been waiting inside her for 6 years, looking for the right object. What it was mostly was recognition. The understanding that the person who had once stood in her bedroom in a cream-colored blouse and said, "I hope you'll be okay," had not in fact moved on, had not in fact settled into whatever life she had built for herself and let the past become the past. Had been watching, had been waiting, had chosen the exact moment of Nadia's most public success to try to dismantle what she had built. Nadia picked up her phone. She scrolled to a number she had not called for 18 months since the last minor legal question she had needed help with, and she pressed call. Marlo Hart answered on the third ring. Nadia. I have a situation, Nadia said. I need to know everything before I do anything. Tell me. Nadia told her. All of it, the reviews, the platforms, the phrase, the screenshot, the timeline. She was precise and she was complete, and she did not editorialize. She had learned over years of working with Marlo that the most valuable thing you could give a lawyer was clean information uncontaminated by the emotional weight you had attached to it. Marlo listened without interrupting. When Nadia finished, there was a brief silence. How long since the award article ran? 3 weeks. And the first review appeared? 8 days after. Another pause. That's not spontaneous, Marlo said. That's a campaign, I know. Do you have copies of everything? I have everything Noah found. I'll get him to document more thoroughly. Good, don't touch the accounts directly. Don't respond to any new reviews until we talk again. Get me everything you have by Thursday. Done, Nadia said. She ended the call. She sat for another moment in the quiet of the back office. Then she thought about something Jun had said several weeks before, during one of their late afternoon conversations when the café had quieted, and they had, almost without noticing, slid into the kind of talk that required honesty to sustain. He had said speaking, she thought, about business in general, but possibly about something more specific, that the worst thing you could do when someone was trying to undermine you was to react before you understood the full shape of what they had built against you. You need to see the whole structure first, he had said, because if you push on the wrong part, you collapse your own position, not theirs. She had thought, at the time, that it was the observation of a man who had been in a lot of negotiations. She had not yet understood all the ways he had learned it. She picked up her phone again. She did not call June. She was not ready to call Jun. She was not sure what calling Jun would mean, exactly, and she had made enough decisions in her life by moving before she had properly thought through the implications. She called Noah instead. I need you to document everything, she said. Every platform, every username, every date, every screenshot. I need it organized and I need it thorough. Can you do that? Yeah, Noah said. Absolutely. How thorough? The kind where nothing is missing. A brief pause. Okay, he said. Yeah, I'll get it done. She went back to the floor. She worked the rest of the shift. She talked to customers, managed the afternoon rush, signed off on an order, dealt with a minor equipment issue, the ordinary physics of running a business, the relentless practical momentum of it, which she had always found, in difficult moments, to be its own kind of help. Not comfort. Just motion. Just the next correct thing, and then the next one. At closing, when the last customer had left and Rosa was cashing out and Noah was in the back doing exactly what she had asked, Nadia stood behind the counter for a moment and looked at her café. The light at this hour was warm and particular, the long amber of a winter evening through glass, catching the steam from the last of the equipment cool down, the worn wood surfaces, the small details that had accumulated over 4 years into something that felt genuinely and irreversibly hers. She thought about Sienna sitting somewhere in the city, behind a phone or a laptop, typing things that were intended to make this go away. She thought about what it must be like to look at another person's life and feel in response not inspiration or even simple indifference, but the specific consuming need to destroy. She did not feel sorry for Sienna, but she did feel the shape of it, the sadness of it, the waste. Then she locked the register, said goodnight to Rosa, checked on Noah, who showed her the beginnings of a document that was already more organized than she had expected from a 22-year-old who'd had 3 hours and turned off the main lights. And then her phone rang. Not Caleb, not Marlowe, not any number she expected. June. She looked at his name on the screen for 2 rings. Then she answered. I heard, he said. She went still. Heard what? A pause. Not evasive, considering. There are people in this city who make it their business to know when certain kinds of situations develop. You've been generating attention since the article. A friend told me something was moving against you online. He paused again. I don't want to overstep. Nadia stood in the darkened cafe, holding her phone, looking at nothing. What kind of friend, she said. The pause this time was a fraction longer. Long enough to be its own kind of answer. The kind who pays attention, June said carefully. Something shifted in the back of Nadia's mind, a small, precise movement, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't noticed was there. She had been cataloging this man for months, the quality of his stillness, the specific shape of his authority, the way people in the cafe occasionally recognized him and then looked with the particular caution of people who recognized someone cut certain they were not certain to be seen, noticing succinct. She had cataloged all of it. She had not yet assembled it. June, she said, yes. What aren't you telling me? The silence that followed was the longest he had ever allowed to develop in a conversation with her. It had weight. It had dimension. It was the silence of a man looking at a door he had been walking toward for some time, standing with his hand on the handle, making a decision about whether to open it. Not tonight, he said finally. Tonight I'm asking if you're okay. Nadia looked at the door of her cafe, the street outside. Seattle in January, cold and wet and indifferent, the city moving around the small warm space booths she had built inside it. I'm going to call you tomorrow, she said, and I'm going to need you to answer a different kind of question. I know, he said. Okay. Good night, Nadia. She ended the call. She stood in the dark for one more moment. Then she pushed through the door, locked it behind her, and walked out into the cold. Behind her, the sign above the door hand-painted, the letters worn slightly at the edges from 2 Seattle winters, still red, ember, and pine. Still lit, still standing. But something had changed in the last 30 minutes, that Nadia could not yet fully name a shift in the weather of the situation. A new pressure system moving in from a direction she had not been tracking. And somewhere across the city, in an office that appeared in no public directory, a man who was not merely what he appeared to be was looking at a file that contained Nadia's name, Ember and Pine's address, and a growing list of connections that someone had decided were worth knowing about. The decision that would make everything irreversible had not yet been made, but it was coming. And Nadia Reeves, who had survived every other thing life had thrown at her by seeing clearly and moving deliberately, was about to discover that some storms give no warning at all before they break. She called him at 8 the next morning, not from the cafe. From her kitchen table, with Elias already at school, and the apartment quiet in the specific way it got. After he left a silence with a different texture than the nighttime silence, thinner somehow, more provisional. She had made coffee. She had not drunk it. She had sat at the table with her hands wrapped around the mug and thought carefully about what she wanted to ask, and in what order. Then she called. John answered on the second ring. Tell me, she said. No preamble, no good morning. She had decided, somewhere in the hours between his calls and one, that she was done with the incremental approach, done with the patient accumulation of pieces of information. Whatever was true about Jun Seo Kong, she needed to know enough of it now to understand what she was standing next to. A pause, she heard him breathe once. Not on the phone, he said. When? Tonight, after you close. Where? He named a restaurant in Eastlake, small, quiet, the kind of place that maintained privacy through atmosphere rather than policy. She knew it by reputation. Good food, low-noise tables, spaced far enough apart to allow actual conversation. 7:30, she said. I'll be there. She ended the call. She drank her coffee. It had gone lukewarm. She went to work. The day was hard in the specific way that days are hard when you are carrying something heavy through the ordinary mechanics of a normal schedule. She made coffee. She managed the floor. She reviewed Noah's documentation, which had grown overnight into a structured archive of screenshots, timestamps, and cross-referenced usernames that was thorough enough to be taken seriously by both a lawyer and a journalist. She sent a copy to Marlowe with a note that was 2 sentences long. She smiled at customers. She answered questions about the menu. She handled a small staffing issue with the careful pragmatism it required. She did not think about the evening. Or she thought about it constantly and performed nothing about it, which was effectively the same thing, and cost more energy. At 5:15, Marlowe called. I've been through Noah's documentation, she said, without greeting. Marlowe never wasted words on greeting when she had something to say. This is more organized than what I see from most corporate clients. Your young employee has a talent for evidence architecture. I'll tell him you said so. Don't. He'll want to be a paralegal, and you'll lose him. Marlowe's voice shifted. This is a real campaign, Nadia. Multiple accounts, coordinated timing, deliberate platform selection. Whoever did this researched your online presence first. Comes. They knew which platforms you monitored and built the early material to look like organic negative feedback before escalating. Nadia stood in the narrow back hallway beside the office door, one hand against the wall. How long had it been running before Noah caught it? Based on the earliest account creation date I can trace, at least 4 months. 4 months. The same number, the same duration. She noticed this and filed it without comment because she was on the phone with her lawyer and she needed her full attention on what Marlowe was saying. The phrase match between the review and the whole social post is your best piece, Marlowe continued. It's specific enough that coincidence is not a credible defense. Combined with the timing relative to the award article and the account pattern, you have a strong foundation for a defamation claim. What's the next step? I draft a cease and desist. 48-hour response window. We demand full retraction across all platforms, public acknowledgement, and we reserve the right to pursue damages. A brief pause. But I need you to confirm with certainty that you can connect the old account to a real person. I can, Nadia said. Silence. How certain, Marlowe said. The profile photo is small and old, but I know that face. Another pause, longer. Marlowe was not a person who asked questions she didn't need the answer to. Who is it? Nadia looked at the wall in front of her. The paint was slightly scuffed, at shoulder height from years of people leaning against it during the same phone calls in the same narrow hallway. Her name is Sienna Vale, she said. She was my closest friend for 11 years. She heard Marlowe exhale once, not in surprise, but in the particular recognition of a person who had spent enough time in law to understand that the most destructive campaigns are almost always personal. Send me everything you have on her, Marlowe said. Full name, last known address, employer, professional contacts. Whatever you can compile without reaching out to her directly. Done by tomorrow morning. Good. Marlowe paused again. Nadia. Yeah, I know this is harder than a stranger doing the same thing. It's not harder, Nadia said. It's just different. She ended the call and stood in the hallway for 20 seconds, breathing. Then she went back to work. The restaurant in Eastlake was half full when she arrived at 7:28. Jun was already there, corner table back to the wall, positioned with the unconscious deliberateness of a man for whom situational awareness was a habit so old it no longer required thought. He stood when she approached, which was the kind of detail that registered because it was genuine rather than performed. She sat. A server appeared. She ordered water. June already had tea. They waited until the server left. All right, Nadia said. She kept her voice level and her hands still on the table. Tell me what you didn't tell me last night. June looked at her. He had the specific quality of a man who was deciding not where to begin, but whether there was still a version of this, where he didn't have to. He appeared to make the decision quickly. CO Meridian is real, he said. Everything I've told you about the company is true. The history, the shipping routes, the legitimate operations. He paused. But it is not only that. Nadia said nothing. She waited. My father built the company during a period when certain Pacific shipping corridors were controlled by people who made the rules of access. He said this carefully, choosing each word with the precision of someone who had been precise about this particular history for a long time. To operate, you paid, or you found a way to be useful to the people who collected payment. My father chose the second option. Useful how? In the beginning, logistically. Space in containers, routes with minimal scrutiny. The kind of capacity that certain people needed and were willing to pay significant amounts to access. He looked at his tea. Over time, useful became something larger, more complex. By the time I inherited the company, the legitimate infrastructure and the other infrastructure were so deeply interwoven that separating them would have required dismantling everything my father built. Nadia looked at him. So you didn't separate them, she said. No, his voice was flat. Not ashamed exactly too far past shame for that, she thought. More like a man reciting a fact about himself that he had long since stopped being surprised by. I maintained it, and then I expanded it, because the legitimate business grew, and when a legitimate business grows in the environment I operated in, the other thing grows with it. It is not a clean arrangement. It was never a clean arrangement. What does it do? Not a question. He met her eyes. Freight movement. Not weapons, not trafficking. Goods. He paused. Goods that certain parties need moved, without the kind of documentation that government agencies find useful. Across Pacific routes, primarily, through port relationships that have been cultivated over 2 decades. And the people who use this network are not pleasant people. The table between them felt very large suddenly. Nadia was aware of the other diners, a couple to her left, a small group near the window, the ordinary ambient noise of a restaurant that had nothing to do with this conversation. She was aware of the specific distance between herself and the nearest exit, which was not a thing she usually tracked. How feared, she said. He looked at her without flinching. Considerably. She breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth. Once. Why are you telling me now? Because you were going to ask, and I was not going to lie to you. He paused. And because something happened this week, that means you needed to know. She went still. What happened? He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed a single sheet of paper on the table. He slid it toward her without unfolding it. She looked at it, then at him. 2 days ago, he said, someone within a competing organization began compiling information about you. Your café, your daily schedule, Elias's school. His voice did not change in register when he said Elias's name, but something behind his eyes did. They are aware of my pattern of attendance at Ember and Pine. They are assessing whether you represent a usable pressure point. The word pressure point went through Nadia like something cold. She did not pick up the paper. She looked at Jun. When you say usable, she said. They want information about my operations. They cannot reach me directly. My security structure prevents direct approach. So they are identifying people I spend time with. He held her gaze. You are at the top of that list. Nadia said nothing for a full 5 seconds. The couple to her left laughed at something. A server walked past carrying plates. Outside the window, Seattle moved through its wet January evening, entirely indifferent. Elias, she said. He is not in immediate danger. They are still in the assessment phase. But it moves, she said. It moves quickly, once it starts. She looked at the folded paper on the table. She looked at her hands. They were completely still, which was partly discipline and partly the fact that she had gone into a state she recognized from the NICU, the suspended stillness that came when panic was too expensive to afford. You should have told me, she said. Her voice was quiet and had an edge in it, like a line drawn in glass. Yes, he said. He didn't argue it, didn't qualify it. You let me build. She stopped. You sat at that table for months, knowing that the proximity alone, could she stopped again. Nadia, don't. The word came out with more force than she intended, and she did not apologize for it. Don't explain it in a way that makes it manageable right now. I'm asking you to give me a minute. He was quiet. She looked at the window. A minute passed that was not actually a minute, but felt like the length of something much larger. My son, she said. My 6-year-old son who can almost read chapter books, and who has an opinion about every food I put in front of him, and who has never, not once in his entire life, asked me for anything he actually needed, without me figuring out how to get it for him. Her voice held. It was a near thing, but it held. He is on a list made by dangerous people, because I made coffee for you every morning. June's jaw moved. Yes, he said, that is what happened. The honesty of it hit her differently than anger would have. She had been braced for justification, for the elaborate architecture of a man defending an indefensible position. The plain yes, unqualified, unpadded, landed somewhere deeper. She picked up the paper, unfolded it. It was a printed surveillance document. Her name at the top, Ember and Pine address. A photograph of the cafe's exterior that appeared to have been taken from across the street. Below that, a photograph of her walking Elias to school. She recognized the coat she had been wearing. It was from 2 weeks ago, Nixa. The Thursday it had snowed lightly, and Elias had complained all the way to the corner about not being allowed to stop and eat the snow from the fence posts. Her hands were not completely still anymore. She folded the paper. She set on the table. Who are they? She said. A rival organization. They've been trying to find leverage against my operations for 8 months. They've been patient, and now they're not being patient. The award article increased your visibility, he said, which increased your association with me in searchable public space. It accelerated their timeline. Nadia looked at him. The award, she said, my award, for the cafe I built. Yes, she almost laughed. She didn't, because it wasn't funny. But the structural irony of it was so complete, the thing she had worked hardest for, had become the thing that exposed her, that some part of her recognized it, cruel precision as the kind of cruel precision that life occasionally achieved without effort. What can you do, she said. I've already intervened in their immediate approach. They will not reach you tonight or in the next several days. He paused. But intervention is a temporary solution. It signals that you matter to me, which confirms their assessment rather than undermining it. So helping me makes it worse. In the short term. And the long term. Another pause. Longer. The long-term solution is more complicated. Tell me the complicated version. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she had not seen on him before, not uncertainty exactly, but something adjacent to it. The face of a man who had arrived at the edge of something he had been walking toward for a while and was not entirely sure of the ground on the other's side. I have been considering a restructuring of CO Meridian, he said. Something I began thinking about before I met you and have been thinking about with more urgency since. He chose the next words carefully. A full divestment of the non-legitimate operations. Federal cooperation. A complete structural rebuild of the company as a clean entity. Nadia stared at him. You're talking about turning yourself in, she said. I'm talking about a managed process, he said. There is a federal investigator I have been in contact with for 4 months. Preliminary conversations. Nothing committed, but the framework exists. 4 months, she said. Yes. She sat with this. 4 months ago, she had still been having late afternoon conversations with him about shipping economics and independent business structures and what Elias's teacher had said at the last parent conference. 4 months ago, she had been moving incrementally and with enormous caution toward trusting this person. 4 months ago, he had been in preliminary contact with federal investigators about his own criminal organization. Who else knows, she said. Within my organization, no one. Outside of it, only the investigator and one attorney. He paused. And now you. Why now? Because the situation with Sienna Vale made your name visible in a way that drew the rival organization's attention faster than I anticipated. And because he stopped. His hands were flat on the table, completely still, and she realized she had never seen him fidget, not once, in all the months she had known him, and she was only now understanding why. Because you deserve to make a decision about this with full information rather than partial. Nadia looked at him for a long moment. Full information, she said slowly. June, I found out tonight that you run a criminal shipping network, that a rival criminal organization has photographs of my son walking to school, and that you have been negotiating with federal authorities for 4 months. Which part of this is full information? Something crossed his face. It was not defensiveness. It was the specific pain of a person hearing an accurate accounting of themselves. "You're right," he said. "I know I'm right." She pushed her chair back, not leaving, just creating space. "I need you to understand what this is from where I'm standing. I am a single mother. I have a café that I built from nothing over 4 years. I have a 6-year-old son who thinks you're one of the few adults in his life who treats him like a real person." Her voice went quieter. "And I just found out that knowing you has put his photograph in a file made by people who frighten other frightening people." Jun did not look away from her. "What do you want me to do?" he said. It was not a deflection. It was a genuine question, asked with the specific gravity of a man who had arrived at a moment where his own preferences had become genuinely secondary. Nadia looked at the folded paper on the table. "I want you to fix it," she said. "Not the way you usually fix things. I want you to fix it in a way that doesn't create 3 new problems while solving this one. The federal process, how long? Months, possibly a year. And during that time, I can manage the immediate threat. But I cannot guarantee—" "Don't tell me what you can't guarantee." Her voice had an edge again. "Tell me what you can control." He held her gaze. "I can intercept any approach to you or Elias. I can keep the rival organization's attention focused on me rather than on you as leverage. I can accelerate the federal timeline, and accelerating it makes you more vulnerable." Considerably. She looked at him. She had known this man for months. She had served him coffee and watched him sit with her son and listen to him talk about his father's business with the specific weight of a person carrying an inheritance they had not entirely chosen. She had, somewhere in those months, allowed herself to begin moving in his direction with the caution of someone who understood exactly how expensive trust could be. She had not known what he was. She had known what he was like, and those were very different things. "I need to think," she said. "I understand." She stood, she picked up her coat. She did not shake his hand, or say anything that would imply resolution, because there was no resolution. There was only the walk back to her car, and the drive home in the quiet apartment where her son was asleep in his room, with his backpack hanging on the door hook and his shoes lined up by the bed in the particular neat row that he had started doing last fall without anyone asking him to. She stood in Elias's doorway for a moment. He was asleep on his side, one hand tucked under his jaw, breathing with the even rhythm of a child who had no reason yet to be afraid of the dark. She looked at him for a long time. Then she walked to her own room and sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the floor. The situation she was in had a particular geometry she recognized from the worst moments of her professional life, the kind where every available option had a cost, where the question was not whether something would be paid, but only what currency would be used. She could remove herself and Elias from the equation, entirely leave the association, create distance that the rival organization might eventually accept as meaningful. She could stay and trust that June's management of the threat was as competent as he believed it was. She could call the investigator herself, cut Jun out of the equation, and try to negotiate direct protection in exchange for the information she now held. None of these options was clean. None of them left her son in a world where she had not, through the specific error of allowing herself to trust someone, put his photograph in a dangerous file. She lay back on the bed without taking her shoes off. The ceiling was the same ceiling it had been yesterday, which struck her as unreasonable. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. A text from an unknown number. 3 words, "We should talk." She stared at it. She had received exactly one communication from Sienna Vale. In 6 years, the 4-sentence text she had deleted without responding to after the betrayal. She had no reason to believe this was Sienna. She had also no reason to believe it was not. She sat up. She typed back, "Who is this?" The response came in 40 seconds. "You know who this is." Then, "I have information about your café situation that you need." "It's not what you think." Nadia's jaw tightened. Then a third message arrived, and this one stopped her breathing for a full 3 seconds. It was a photograph. The same photograph that had been in June's document, Nadia walking Elias to school 2 weeks ago. Except this version was higher resolution than June's copy, and in the corner of the frame, partially visible, was the edge of a second person. Someone standing at a distance, in the direction Nadia had not been looking. Someone who had taken this particular photograph from a different angle than the one in Jun's document, which meant the photograph had been taken by two different people, which meant there had been at least two people watching her that morning. Nadia put the phone face down on the bed. She pressed both hands against her thighs and made herself breathe. She was not in immediate danger. She was in her apartment. The door was locked. Elias was asleep 12 feet away. She picked the phone back up. She called Jun. He answered before the first ring finished. What happened? Someone just texted me from an unknown number, she said. They have a photograph of Elias and me. Higher resolution than your copy. Different angle. A pause. The quality of June's silence changed in a way she was starting to be able to read it became denser, more deliberate. The silence of a man shifting from one mode into another. Don't respond further, he said. I already responded. Twice. Before I knew what it was. That's fine. Don't respond again. She heard him move a chair, she thought. The sound of a man standing. I'm sending someone to your street tonight. They'll be outside. You won't see them, but they'll be there. Jun, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, you don't want people outside your apartment without your consent, someone. That's part of it. What's the other part? She looked at the closed door of Elias's room. The other part is that if whoever texted me is connected to the people you described, then having your people outside my building tells them you're protecting me, which tells them their assessment was correct. Silence, which makes it worse, he said. A longer silence. You're right. I know I'm right. She said it without heat this time. Just fact. Who is texting me? A pause that ran 3 seconds. I'm not some certain. Best guess. There are two people who could have that photograph from that angle, he said carefully. One of them works for the rival organization and would not reach out to you directly. They have no reason to. Another pause. The other is someone I know. Nadia's eyes narrowed. Someone in your organization. Former, he said. Someone who left under complicated circumstances. Someone who has, in the past, used information as currency. As in, they might be playing both sides. As in, they might be playing several sides, simultaneously, and calling none of them. She processed this. So I have a coordinated smear campaign, run by someone I used to call my best friend, a rival criminal organization that has photographs of my son, a federal investigation in progress, and now possibly a rogue operative from your former network who wants to what? Sell me information. That would be the most optimistic interpretation, yes. She almost laughed again. She still didn't. What's the least optimistic interpretation? He was quiet for a moment. That the text was a test. To see how you respond. To assess whether you're a viable channel of communication toward me. And by responding, you responded before you had information. It's not the same as responding with knowledge. That's a very lawyerly distinction. It's the accurate one. She stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the street-wet pavement, the amber streak of streetlights, a car she didn't recognize parked at the corner that had not been there when she came home, which she had noticed because she always noticed, because she had spent 6 years training herself to notice exactly this kind of thing, and it had served her, and now she didn't know if it was serving her or only showing her more clearly how exposed she was. Tell me something true, she said. A pause. What do you want to know? Did you know, when you first started coming to the cafe, that she searched for the word observable. Did you know that being associated with you made me a target? The pause before his answer was the most honest thing he had done all evening. It went 4 full seconds. I knew it was possible, he said. I assessed it as low probability at the beginning. I reassessed as time passed, and I was wrong about the timeline. She absorbed this. So you made a calculation, she said. Yes, and the calculation was wrong, yes. She stood at the window with the phone against her ear and looked at the car at the corner that she didn't recognize, and she thought about her son asleep 12 feet away, and she thought about Marlowe's cease and desist, waiting to be sent, and she thought about the federal investigator Jun had been talking to for 4 months. And she thought about a positive pregnancy test on a kitchen table 6 years ago. And the two decisions she had made that night, the second of which had been that whatever happened next would happen on her own terms. I'm going to deal with Sienna first, she said. That's the thing I can control with clean hands. Marlowe sends the cease and desist tomorrow morning. We publish the evidence. We let the legal process do what it's designed to do. And the other situation, she said, you are going to tell me tomorrow the exact name and current location of the person who sent me that text. And you are going to be completely honest with me about every interaction you've had with the federal investigator. Every conversation, every commitment, everything. Nadia, those are not requests, Juns. Silence, all right, he said. And if there is anything else, anything at all, that you have not told me, because you decided it was information I didn't need or couldn't handle, I want it tomorrow. Everything that is relevant to the safety of my son. Are we clear? We're clear. She looked at the car at the corner one more time. Then she pulled the curtain closed. Good night, she said. She ended the call. She stood in the middle of her bedroom with the phone in her hand, and she let herself feel, for exactly 30 seconds, the full weight of what she was inside. The vertigo of it. The specific loneliness of being the person who holds everything together and has no one to hand the weight to, even temporarily, even for the length of one honest conversation where she did not have to know the next move. 30 seconds. Then she put the phone on the nightstand. She went and checked on Elias. He had shifted in his sleep, turned onto his back, one arm thrown out to the side with the boneless completeness of childhood unconsciousness. His chest rose and fell. She pulled his blanket up slightly. She went back to her room. She did not sleep for a long time. But she lay in the dark, and she thought, systematically, through every piece of information she had, and by the time exhaustion finally pulled her under, she had begun to see the shape of what she was going to do. It was not going to be clean. It was not going to be safe. But it was going to be hers. And when she woke at 5:15 the next morning, before the alarm, before the city was fully itself again, the first thing she did was text Marlowe. Send it, she wrote. Then she lay in the gray pre-dawn quiet and waited for the day to start breaking open around her, knowing that by the time the sun cleared the Seattle skyline, there would be no version of this story left where she could choose not to be in the middle of it. The cease and desist was sent at 7:42 a.m. And 3 hours later, Caleb Mercer called. Caleb called at 10:47 in the morning. Nadia was behind the counter when her phone buzzed against the register, and she saw his name on the screen and felt something that self-surprised her, not the name itself, not the timing, not the particular quality of dread that accompanied it, because she had long ago made her peace with the fact that Caleb Mercer appeared at the moments when her life was already complicated enough without him. She let it ring. He called again 4 minutes later. She handed the counter to Rosa and went to the back office and closed the door and called him back, because she had learned over 6 years that Caleb calling twice in quick succession meant he had something he believed was urgent. And the only way to determine whether his assessment of urgency matched reality was to answer her. I need to tell you something, he said. His voice had a quality she recognized from the last time she had spoken to him, that particular compressed guilt of a man who had been carrying something and had finally decided the carrying was worse than the telling. Go ahead, she said. I talked to Sienna, a pause. About 3 months before, about 3 months after your award was announced. We ran into each other at an industry event. I had a couple of drinks and another pause. I told her about the award, about the article, about the café. Nadia sat very still. I told her you'd been nominated, he said. And I said, his voice caught. I said something about how you had really made something of yourself. And she said something neutral, and I thought, he stopped. I thought it was fine. I thought it was just conversation. The office was quiet. Through the closed door, Nadia could hear the muffled rhythm of the café, the espresso machine, a murmur of voices, the brief clatter of something being set down on the counter. Caleb, she said, yeah, you told Sienna where to point. Silence. I didn't know she would. I know you didn't know. Her voice was completely even. But you did it anyway. Nadia, I'm sorry. I didn't think. I know you didn't think. She pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of her nose. What else did you tell her? Just about the cafe. The article. I mentioned Elias. A beat. I said he was doing well. The mention of Elias's name in this context moved through her like something physical, a cold current, low and fast. You told her about Elias, she said. Just in Timpa. Caleb. Her voice dropped to the register she used when she needed someone to stop talking and hear her. Do you understand what has been happening to this cafe for the last 4 months? I read the article this morning about the reviews. She has been running a coordinated campaign against my business for 4 months. Multiple fake accounts, manufactured reviews. She researched my platforms before she started. She timed it to my award. A pause. And she knew Elias existed because you told her. The silence on the line had a different texture now. She wouldn't go after Elias, he said. He said it with the confidence of a man who had decided the alternative was too uncomfortable to hold. You don't know what she would or wouldn't do, Nadia said. You don't actually know her. You slept with her for 4 months and then she went away and you categorized her as a mistake and stopped thinking about her. That's not knowing someone. More silence. I need to tell you something else, he said. Nadia waited. About Elias. His voice had gone quieter. The guilt in it had changed shape, older now, heavier, the specific weight of something that had been carried a very long time. I've been thinking about I want to be in his life, Nadia. I know I have no right to just appear and expect. Stop, she said. Caleb. The word was a wall. We are not having that conversation right now. Right now, I am dealing with a legal situation that your carelessness helped create, and I need to focus on that. Do you understand? A long pause. Yeah, he said. Quietly. Yeah, I understand. I'll call you when this is handled. She ended the call. She sat in the office for 3 minutes. She was counting them. She had learned, over years, to give difficult information a measured amount of time to settle before she moved, because the decisions made inside the first sharp moment of more than decisions made 30 seconds later, or 3 minutes later when the edges had clarified. 3 minutes. Then she picked up her phone and called Marlo. Caleb just told me he's the one who told Sienna about the award, she said. A brief silence, inadvertently or deliberately. Inadvertently. He ran into her at an industry event. Does he have documentation of the conversation? It was verbal 3 months ago at a party. Then it's useful background, but not material evidence. Marlo's voice stayed level, clinical in the way that was actually its own form of steadiness. It contextualizes her motive, which we don't strictly need the evidence already establishes the campaign. But it fills the picture. Has she responded to the cease and desist? Not yet. We have 39 hours remaining on the window. What happens if she doesn't respond? We file, Marlo said. And then everything gets considerably more public and considerably more expensive for her. Nadia stood up. She moved to the small window in the back office that looked out onto the alley behind the cafe brick walls. The smell of rain, a dumpster she kept having to remind the neighboring business not to overflow. Ordinary details. Aggressively ordinary. Marlo, I need to ask you something outside the immediate situation. Go ahead. If someone came to you with information that a person they were close to was cooperating with a federal investigation, a white-collar investigation, organized crime adjacent, and that person's cooperation was going to become public in the near term, what would your advice be? A pause. A significant one. That's a very specific hypothetical, Marlo said. Yes. My advice would be to put distance between yourself and that person before the cooperation becomes public, unless you have your own legal exposure to the situation, in which case you would need your own representation immediately. And if there's no direct legal exposure, then distance. Physical, professional, and documented. A pause, Nadia. Are you in a situation that requires me to... I'll call you if it gets there, Nadia said. I want you to call me before it gets there. I'll try. She ended the call. She stood at the window looking at the brick wall and the rain. Then she went back to work because the cafe was open and there were customers and the espresso machine did not pause for consequence. At 2 in the afternoon, Noah appeared at her elbow with his phone. You need to see this, he said. He showed her the screen. A post on one of the platforms where the fake reviews had appeared, not a review this time. A comment thread on a local hospitality forum. Someone posting under a new account had begun a thread titled, "The Truth About Ember and Pines Award Nomination." The account was new, 12 hours old. But the post was detailed and specific in a way that the previous anonymous content had not been. It referenced specific supplier relationships, specific staffing decisions, specific financial details that were not publicly available. Details that would require either industry connections or direct knowledge of Nadia's operation. Nadia read it twice. Her stomach tightened. "How did they get this?" Noah said. He was keeping his voice low, aware of the customers at the nearest table. "I don't know yet," she said. "Screenshot everything. All of it. Send it to Marlowe. Already sent," he said. She looked at him. "I've been monitoring since this morning," he said. He was 22 and looked, in this moment, like a person discovering that the skills he had considered minor were turning out to matter in ways that surprised him. "I set up alerts on every keyword. The post went up at 1:58. I had it at 2:01. "Good," she said. "That's very good, Noah." She took her phone to the back office. She called June. He answered immediately. She had noticed, over the last 48 hours, that he always answered immediately now. No more second rings. Whatever had shifted in the situation had also shifted his availability. "Someone just posted detailed internal information about my business on a hospitality forum," she said. "Supplier relationships, staffing, financial details that are not publicly available." A pause that lasted 1 second. "Sienna. That was my first thought. But some of this she wouldn't have access to supplier specifics. She doesn't have connections in that part of the industry." Who does? Nadia thought about this. She walked through the list in her head. People who had been in her operation long enough to know the details referenced in the post. Former staff, her accountant, Marlowe, suppliers, and the people they might have talked to. "Jun," she said slowly. "The person who texted me last night." A pause. "What about them? You said they were someone who used information as currency. Someone who might be playing multiple sides." She kept her voice very steady. "Is it possible they have a connection to Sienna?" The silence on the other end lasted long enough that she knew the answer before he spoke. "I don't know," he said. But the way he said it carefully, with too much precision, told her the honest answer was, "I haven't ruled it out." "Find out," she said. "I'm already looking. Faster." She ended the call. She sat for a moment. Then she opened her laptop and typed a number into a search she had been resisting running for 4 months. It took her 11 minutes to find what she was looking for, not because the information wasn't there, but because she had been careful, methodical, following threads the way she had learned to follow financial discrepancies, looking for the connection that shouldn't exist. She found it. A professional consulting firm, listed in a business registry that served the hospitality and logistics sectors. Founded 4 years ago, listed as a business contact on a LinkedIn profile belonging to a person Nadia had never heard of. The same consulting firm appeared, buried in a subpage of an industry forum, as a contributor to a research report on independent café operations, published 8 months ago. The report contained in its methodology section a reference to anonymous case studies of Seattle area food and beverage businesses. And the person who ran that consulting firm, a name Nadia, had to dig 3 layers to surface had a verified business connection, through a shared board membership of a nonprofit, to a shipping industry professional whose name appeared in a public CO Meridian corporate filing from 6 years ago. Not Jun himself, someone in the structure he had described, someone from the layer he had called complicated. Nadia stared at the screen. The person who had texted her last night wasn't just playing sides. They had been the source of the internal café information, which meant they had a connection to Sienna that predated the campaign. Which meant the campaign was not simply Sienna's private obsession, metastasizing after a drunken conversation with Caleb. There was infrastructure beneath it. Someone had provided Sienna with information. Someone had helped her make the fake accounts look credible by seeding them with real details. And that someone was connected, however distantly, to June's world. Nadia closed the laptop. She pressed both palms flat on the desk. This was the thing she had been missing. The thing that had made the campaign feel slightly too sophisticated for pure personal vendetta because it was. Sienna's rage was real. The obsession was real. But someone had handed her a shovel and shown her where to dig. She picked up her phone and typed a text to June. "I need everything you have on this number." She copied the unknown number from the previous night's texts and sent it. His response came in under a minute, working on it. "Where are you?" "Café," she typed. "Stay there," he sent back. She was not accustomed to being told to stay anywhere. She considered ignoring the instruction. She decided for the moment that the instruction aligned with her own assessment. The café was her ground, the place where she had the most information and the most control, and walking out of it right now would give up the only terrain advantage she had. She went back to the floor. At 3:45, June walked in. He was not alone. There was a woman, a few steps behind him, mid-40s, sharp-eyed, unremarkable clothing. The specific quality of someone who was very good at not drawing attention while being entirely attentive to everything in the room. Nadia registered her and registered the fact that June had brought someone without announcing it, and she stored both facts without expression. June sat at his table. The woman sat 2 tables away, ordered a coffee from Rosa with the practiced normalcy of someone doing this for professional reasons, and opened a laptop. Nadia walked to June's table. "Who is she?" Nadia said quietly enough that Rosa couldn't hear. "Someone I trust," he said. "That's not an answer." "Her name is Ellen Park. She was a federal liaison before she went private. She works for the attorney I mentioned." Nadia glanced at Ellen, who was looking at her laptop with complete apparent disinterest. "Why is she here?" "Because the person who texted you last night is not what I initially assessed." Jun kept his voice very low. "His name is Daniel Rhee. He worked as a logistics coordinator for Sao Meridian for 9 years. He left under circumstances I described as complicated. The fuller version is that I had reason to believe he had been selling information to multiple parties for approximately the last 2 years of his employment." "Did you report it?" "No." Nadia looked at him. "I handled it internally," he said. He didn't elaborate on what that meant, and she didn't ask because she was almost certain she didn't want the answer. "And now," she said, "now Daniel Rhee appears to have established a relationship with Sienna Vale that started approximately 8 months ago. Before the award, before the campaign, Ellen has found a financial connection payments from a hospitality consulting entity to a shell account that traces back to Rhee." Nadia was very still. "Someone paid him," she said. "Someone connected to Sienna's professional network paid him for information about your operation," Jun said. "It may have been Sienna directly through a layer of insulation. It may have been someone else who had separate reasons to want leverage over your business and found Sienna a useful vehicle." "What separate reasons?" Jun looked at her steadily. "Ember and Pine's location in Pioneer Square has attracted expansion interest from at least 2 commercial real estate groups in the last 18 months. Your lease is favorable. The block is developing. There are parties who would benefit from a discredited or failed business in that space. The café, her specific physical café, the location she had chosen because the rent made the numbers work and the neighborhood had the quality of a place that rewarded loyalty. Someone wanted the address. So Sienna was being used," Nadia said. "Sienna's anger was real," June said, "but it was found and pointed." She breathed through her nose slowly. "By who? We're still tracing. But Rhee is the connective tissue. He sold information about your business to someone who then connected with Sienna and offered resources and support for a campaign she wanted to run anyway." He paused. She didn't know she was being used as a tool. She thought she had an ally. Nadia sat down across from June. She pulled the chair out and sat in it with the directness of someone who had run out of patience for standing. "Rhee texted me last night," she said. "I know why. Because he is aware that my cooperation with the federal investigation is accelerating. He is trying to establish a communication channel that gives him options, either to warn the rival organization through you or to position himself as cooperative if the federal process closes around him. He's protecting himself. He's been protecting himself for 2 years. This is the latest version of it. Nadia looked at the woman Ellen Park, who was still at her laptop 2 tables away. What does she need from me? Your documentation. Everything Noah compiled. The connection you found between the consulting firm and the forum report. She can trace what you found faster than you can, and with tools you don't have access to. And in exchange, she folds your situation into the existing federal framework. The Sienna campaign, the real estate interest, all of it becomes part of a larger documented picture that the investigators are already assembling. Nadia looked at him. That means I become part of a federal investigation. As a victim and a witness, he said, not a subject. You're certain of that. Ellen is certain of that. I trust her certainty more than my own on this particular question. She looked at Ellen again. Ellen, sensing this, looked up from her laptop and met Nadia's gaze directly. Not reassuringly, not with any performed warmth, just directly, with the level attention of someone who was offering information rather than comfort. Nadia made a decision approximately 4 seconds. She stood up. She walked to Ellen's table and sat down across from her. What do you need? She said. Ellen closed her laptop halfway. Everything you have. The documentation, the connection you found this afternoon between the consulting firm and the forum, supplier records going back 18 months, lease documents. She paused. And I need you to respond to Ree's text. Nadia went still. Why? Because he reached out to you for a reason, and that reason is information we need. If you engage him carefully, he may give us the thread that connects the real estate interest to the campaign in a way we can document. You want me to bait him. I want you to respond neutrally and let him say what he came to say. Ellen's voice was completely flat. Not unkind, just efficient, in the way of someone who had learned that efficiency was its own form of respect. You don't have to lie to him. Just don't close the door. Nadia thought about this. What if he's dangerous? He's not physically dangerous. He's an information broker who is currently aware that his position is deteriorating. He wants a conversation, not a confrontation. And if you're wrong, then Jun handles it, Ellen said, with the matter-of-fact tone of someone describing a contingency plan for a logistics problem rather than a potential security incident. Nadia looked back at June, who was watching her from his table with the contained stillness she had spent months learning to read. He was not telling her what to do. He was not performing confidence to reassure her. He was simply present, in the way he had always been present fully, without agenda, without performance of an outcome he was trying to engineer. She thought about what Elias had said. He doesn't act different when you're not looking. She pulled out her phone. She opened the text thread from the unknown number. She typed, "What do you want to tell me?" She showed it to Ellen before sending. Ellen read it, nodded once. Nadia sent it. The response came in under 2 minutes. Not here. Can you meet tonight? Nadia looked at Ellen. Where? Ellen said quietly. Nadia typed. Where a location appeared. A bar in Belltown Public, busy on a Tuesday evening. The kind of place with enough ambient noise to make conversation private without requiring privacy. Ellen was already typing on her laptop. I know it, she said. Good sightlines. Multiple exits. He chose it because it's comfortable for him, which means he's been there before, which means it's connected to his usual pattern. She looked up. Go, Jun won't be visible, but he'll be close. I'll be there before you. Nadia looked at the address on her phone. I have a son at school pickup in 40 minutes, she said. Can someone cover it? Nadia called Mrs. Kaminsky. The phone rang 3 times an eternity, and then the older woman's voice came on, steady and unremarkable. The voice of someone who had picked Elias up from school 11 times in the last 2 years without once making Nadia feel the weight of the favor. I need you tonight, Nadia said. Pick up at 3:15 and stay until I'm back. I don't know what time. I'll be there, Mrs. Kaminsky said, without a single unnecessary word. Nadia ended the call. She looked at Noah, who was at the counter, aware that something was happening and professionally pretending not to be. You're running the floor until close, she told him. He nodded. He did not ask why. She went to the back office. She took off her café apron. She put on her coat. She checked her phone, nothing new from the unknown number. She looked at herself briefly in the small mirror above the hand. Sync, not vanity, just the particular check of a person, making sure they look like someone who has their footing, because sometimes that was the only armor available. She walked back through the café. Jun was standing, coat on, and the quality of his readiness was different from anything she had seen in him before, not tense, not performed, but genuinely alert in the way that a person is alert when the situation has required them to be what they actually are, rather than the version they have been maintaining. "You don't have to come," she said quietly enough for only him. "I know," he said. "Ree will recognize you. He won't see me." She looked at him for a moment. "If this goes wrong," she said. "It won't." That's not an answer. He met her eyes. "If it goes wrong, you walk out. You don't engage further. You walk to the first public place with other people, and you call Marlowe, not me. Do you understand? Why not you? Because if it goes wrong, it will be because my presence created a problem, and calling me will make that problem worse." He held her gaze. "Call Marlowe. She'll know what to do." Nadia absorbed this. The fact that he had mapped out a scenario where his own involvement was the liability, and then handed her the honest protocol for it, told her more about him than any of the confessions of the last 48 hours. "Okay," she said. She walked to the door. The bar in Belltown was loud in the way Tuesday evening bars are loud, not festive, but populated. The particular crowd of after-work people and early dinner people, and the small category of people who went to bars alone on weekday evenings, for reasons that were nobody else's business. Nadia arrived at 6:48. She was 12 minutes early. Ellen Park was already there, at a table near the back wall with a glass of something amber in front of her, and a relaxed posture that was entirely unconvincing to anyone trained to notice that kind of thing, which Ree presumably was. Nadia did not acknowledge Ellen. She found a table with good sight lines to the door and ordered a sparkling water and waited. Daniel Ree walked in at 6:59. He was smaller than she had imagined. Mid-40s, compact, with the economical movement of someone who was perpetually aware of the space around him, not nervous, but calculated, every gesture slightly too deliberate to be entirely natural. He spotted her before she moved, which confirmed that he had been given a physical description, which meant he had done more preparation for this meeting than he was going to admit. He sat down across from her. He didn't order anything. "Thank you for coming," he said. His voice was even. Educated. Pacific Northwest with some other accent underneath it that she couldn't immediately place. "I almost didn't," she said. "I know." He folded his hands on the table. He was wearing a ring plain silver, worn down on the inside. "I want to be straightforward with you. Please. I know about the campaign against your cafe. I know who's behind it, and I know about the real estate interests that provided support." He paused. "I also know about June's federal cooperation. And I know that in the next 30 to 60 days, that cooperation is going to become visible enough that anyone associated with him will start receiving uncomfortable attention." Nadia looked at him. "You came here to warn me," she said. "I came here to offer you information in exchange for something." "What something?" He met her eyes. "Access to June." "Not physical access. Communication. I need to get a message to him that isn't intercepted by the people who are currently monitoring his channels." Nadia kept her face completely still. "Why?" "Because I have information that is relevant to his federal process, and I want to provide it in a way that benefits me." He said it without apparent shame. "I know how that sounds." "It sounds exactly like what it is," she said. "Yes." He unfolded his hands, refolded them. A tell the only one she had seen so far. "The people behind the real estate interest in your cafe are the same people who funded the rival organization's approach to your situation. The money trail connects them. If June's investigators don't have that connection, their case has a gap that the defense will use." He paused. "I can close that gap." Nadia sat across from this man who had sold information about her business to people who had used it to manufacture her professional destruction, and she breathed evenly and kept her hands flat on the table and thought with complete clarity. "You connected Sienna to the campaign," she said. He didn't answer. Which was its own answer. You gave her internal information about my operation. Still no answer. And now you want me to broker a deal for you with the man whose organization you were leaking from for 2 years. He held her gaze, in exchange for information that helps him. And that ends what's being done to your business. My business is already being handled, she said. The campaign is documented. The cease and desist is in process. I don't need you to end it. Something flickered in his expression. Reassessment. The real estate interest won't stop at Sienna, he said. If the campaign fails, they'll move to other approaches. They have resources and patience. Then I'll handle those too. He looked at her for a moment with the expression of a person recalibrating a situation they had modeled incorrectly. You're not afraid of me, he said. It came out half question. No, she said. Most people in this situation. I'm not most people in this situation, she said. I'm the specific person who built the thing they're trying to take. And I've been dealing with people trying to take things from me since before you knew my name existed. He was quiet. Nadia leaned forward slightly, not threatening, deliberate. Here's what's going to happen, she said, keeping her voice low and completely even. You are going to give the information you have to the investigator running Jun's federal case directly. Not through me, not through Jun, directly, she held his gaze. In exchange, that communication and the fact that you initiated it will be documented in a way that's useful to you when your own situation reaches the people who make decisions about such things. That's the deal. He stared at her. You don't have the authority to offer that, he said. I have the authority to connect you with the persons, she said. Right now, in this room. She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she looked across the bar. Ellen Park raised her head from her drink and looked at Ree with the direct, unhurried attention of someone who had been listening to every word of a conversation she had positioned herself to hear, and whose presence in this room was not, and had never been, a coincidence. Ree's jaw went tight. He looked back at Nadia. In his eyes, she saw the specific moment when a man realizes he has been outmaneuvered in a room he chose because it made him comfortable, and that the woman across from him had arrived already knowing exactly what she was going to do. He looked down at the table. He breathed once, slowly. All right, he said. Nadia stood. She picked up her sparkling water, and she took one sip, and she set the glass down carefully, with the precision of a person who does not waste gestures on anything they do not mean. Ellen will take it from here, she said. She walked toward the door. Her heart was hitting her ribs with a force that she was fairly certain was not entirely healthy. Her hands were not shaking, but they wanted to. She could feel the wanting of it, the physical demand of adrenaline looking for an outlet. She breathed through it. She kept her pace even. She did not look back. Outside, the cold hit her immediately wet Seattle air, the smell of rain on pavement, the city noise that she had lived inside long enough that it had become a kind of company. Jun was across the street, not close, not visible to anyone who wasn't looking. Leaning against the wall of a building with his hands in his coat pockets and his face turned in her direction with the particular stillness of a man who had been waiting and watching with his full attention. She crossed the street. She stopped in front of him. She looked at his face, the composure of it, the weight behind the composure, everything she had spent months assembling into a picture she was still not sure she had complete. Ree is talking to Ellen, she said. Jun nodded once. Something moved behind his eyes. Not relief, exactly something older than relief. Nadia, don't, she said. He stopped. Not tonight, she said. Tonight I need to go get my son from Mrs. Kaminsky, and I need to sit on the couch with him and watch whatever he wants to watch, and I need to not think about any of this for 2 hours. Do you understand? Yes, he said. Tomorrow we talk about what comes next. All of it. She held his gaze. Everything. Everything, he said. She looked at him for one more moment. Then her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Marlowe. She answered it. Sienna responded. Marlowe said. Nadia went very still. She's refusing the retraction, Marlowe said. She sent a response through an attorney, a real one, someone with a defamation specialty, which means she had this prepared before we sent the cease and desist. A pause. And Nadia. Her attorney's letter includes a counter-allegation. She claims that Ember and Pine's association with CO Meridian constitutes a material undisclosed risk that she was acting in the public interest to expose. The cold air seemed to get colder. She knows about Jun, Nadia said. Her attorney's letter implies it, yes. They're framing the entire campaign as whistleblowing. Nadia looked at June. He was watching her face read the situation, and he already knew, she could see it in the way his jaw set, that what she was hearing was something that changed the shape of everything they had been building toward this evening. She's not going to fold, Nadia said. Not voluntarily, Marlowe said. We file, tomorrow. Do it, Nadia said. She ended the call. She stood on the wet sidewalk with Jun 3 feet away, and the city going on around them without pause, and she felt, for one full second, the total weight of the position she was in the legal fight opening on one side, the federal process closing from another, a real estate interest, with patience and resources behind all of it, and her café in the middle of it all, still lit, still open, still hers. 1 second. Then she looked at Jun. They're going to use your name, she said. I know. It's going to get worse before it gets better. Yes. She looked at the street. The rain had started again, light, persistent, the particular Seattle rain that wasn't dramatic enough to shelter from, but wet enough to matter if you stood in it long enough. I need you to do something, she said. Tell me. She looked back at him. I need you to call your investigator tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight. And I need the timeline accelerated to whatever the fastest version is, regardless of what it costs you personally. She held his gaze. Because Sienna's attorney just made your name part of my legal battle. And that means from this moment forward, the only version of this that ends without destroying everything I've built is the one where your cooperation is already a documented fact before anyone can spin it into something else. Jun looked at her. In 6 years of building her life back from nothing, Nadia had made hundreds of hard decisions. She had made them alone, in empty apartments, in quiet offices and hospital parking garages, with no one to confirm that she was choosing correctly. This was not one of those decisions. This was 2 people, standing in the rain in Seattle, choosing at the same time. June reached into his coat and pulled out his phone. He pressed a contact. He held the phone to his ear. And Nadia stood beside him on the wet sidewalk, watching his face as the line connected, feeling the specific vertigo of a moment where everything that was going to happen next had already been set in motion, and there was absolutely no version of any of it left that did not require her to be exactly who she had spent 6 years becoming. The call connected. June began to speak. June spoke for 11 minutes. Nadia stood beside him on the wet sidewalk and did not move. She could hear only his side of the conversation clipped, precise, the particular economy of a man who had been rehearsing this call in some form for months and had now stopped rehearsing and started doing. He used language she didn't fully understand, references to case numbers and contact protocols and something called a proffer framework, and she understood enough to know that what she was hearing was a door opening all the way that had previously been opened only part way. When he ended the call, he stood for a moment with the phone at his side. The rain continued, thin, persistent, indifferent. It's moving, he said. How fast? 30 days. He looked at her. There will be a period where my name is in the news, where CO Meridian's history becomes public, where people who have known me in one context discover other contexts. A pause. It will not be quiet, I know. Your name may appear. I know that too. He looked at her with something in his face that she had not seen there before, not vulnerability exactly, but the specific openness of a man who had just done the thing he could not undo and was now standing in the first moment of a life that had no reversals left in it. Go get Elias, he said. She nodded. She walked to her car. She drove to Mrs. Kaminsky's with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. And, the city sliding past us the windows in its wet, lit, relentless way, and she thought about nothing specific because her brain had reached the particular state of saturation where it needed to process rather than add, and the only thing available for processing right now was the road in front of her and the destination at the end of it. Mrs. Kaminsky opened the door before Nadia knocked. Elias was on the couch with a blanket and a half-eaten bowl of something that appeared to be soup. Watching a nature documentary about deep-sea fish, with the focused absorption he brought to any information he had decided, was worth his full attention. He looked up when Nadia came in. "The anglerfish makes its own light," he said. "From inside." "I know," Nadia said. "That's what it uses to catch things." He looked back at the screen. "It makes the light, and then it waits." Nadia looked at her son for a moment. Then she sat down next to him on the couch and pulled part of his blanket over her own legs without asking. "Muttons." And he shifted slightly to accommodate her, with the unconscious generosity of a child who had never once questioned, would never once whether his mother deserved to be comfortable. She watched anglerfish for 40 minutes. It was the best 40 minutes of her week. The filing happened the next morning. Marlowe sent the defamation suit documentation at 9:15, simultaneously publishing on behalf of Nadia a public statement that was 1 page long and contained nothing but verifiable fact. It named Sienna Vale. It attached the evidence Noah had compiled, the account patterns, the time analysis, the phrase match, the posting timeline. It attached the supplier certification records and inspection documentation that specifically refuted every material claim in the campaign. It noted the existence of the cease and desist and Sienna's refusal of it. It did not mention June. It did not mention real estate interests or rival organizations or federal investigations. It was, precisely and deliberately, the story it appeared to be. A documented account of a coordinated defamation campaign against a small business, presented by the person who owned that business, with the evidence attached. Nadia posted it on Ember and Pine's own platforms at 9:30. By noon, it had been shared 400 times. By 3 in the afternoon, a journalist from a Seattle-based publication that covered small business and independent hospitality had reached out asking for comment. Nadia sent her response through Marlowe brief, factual, referring the journalist to the documentation already public. By 5, 2 other small business owners had shared Nadia's statement with their own accounts, adding their voices not to attack Sienna, but to describe their own experiences with coordinated anonymous campaigns and what it had cost them. The conversation that opened was not viral, in the way that outrage goes viral. It was slower, more considered, the kind of spread that happens when something true finds the people it was true for. Ember and Pine's foot traffic on Wednesday was 12% above its average for that time of year. Noah brought Nadia the numbers at closing time with the careful neutrality of someone who understood. This was not a victory lap, but a data point. "It's working," he said. "It's working today," she said. "Keep documenting." She went home. She was in her kitchen, making dinner, the particular autopilot of a weeknight meal that she had made enough times to manage without thought when her phone rang, and she looked at the screen and saw Sienna Vale's name appearing for the first time. In 6 years as a direct call rather than a reference in a legal document. She stood at the stove with a wooden spoon in one hand and her phone in the other, and she looked at the name for 3 rings. Then she answered. Sienna's voice when it came was not what Nadia expected. She had been prepared for anger, for the particular brittle aggression of someone backed into a corner who had decided to send attack was still the best option. What she got taught was something rawer and less constructed than that, a voice that sounded like a person who had been awake for too long and had run out of the energy required to maintain a position. "I need you to know," Sienna said, "that I know what I did." Nadia stirred the pot once, turned the flame down. "Okay," she said. "Not just the reviews, all of it." A pause. "The affair. I know it was me who I know. You know it wasn't just a mistake. I went after him. I wanted what you had. I wanted," her voice broke slightly and then steadied. "I wanted to be the person he chose. And when that turned out to be something I'd destroyed rather than something I'd won, She stopped. "You found someone else to blame," Nadia said. Silence. "Yes," Sienna said. Nadia looked at the pot on the stove. Steam was rising from it in a thin, consistent column. "The campaign is documented," she said. "The lawsuit is filed. That process is going to continue regardless of this call. You understand that. I know. Your attorney can't make the evidence disappear by calling what you did whistleblowing. That's not what it was, and a judge will see that. I know." Sienna's voice was very quiet. "My attorney told me the same thing this morning." A pause. I'm going to retract it. Publicly. I'll do what the letter asked. I should have done it when you sent it. Nadia was quiet. Why didn't you? She said. A long pause. Because retracting it meant admitting I was the one who did it. And I thought, Sienna exhaled. I thought I still had some way to make it look like something else. Like concern. Like public interest. Her voice went flat with the specific flatness of self-disgust. There were people who told me I could. People who said they could help me make it look. Nadia said. Silence. A different quality of silence this time. How do you know that name? Sienna said. It doesn't matter how I know it. Nadia moved the pot off the flame. She leaned against the counter and looked at the kitchen wall. He used you, Sienna. He gave you information and support and helped you build a more convincing campaign. And he did it because someone else paid him to, and that someone else wanted my cafe's location for a real estate deal. She paused. You thought you had an ally. You had a tool. The silence on the line lasted long enough that Nadia could hear distantly the sound of traffic wherever Sienna was sitting. I believed him, Sienna said, very small. I know you did. That doesn't make what I did, no, Nadia said. It doesn't. More silence. I'll retract it, Sienna said again. Tomorrow morning, publicly and completely. Send it to Marlo first. She'll need to approve the language before you post it. Okay. Nadia straightened up from the counter. She picked up the wooden spoon. She looked at the pot she had moved off the heat. Sienna, she said. Yeah, I'm not going to tell you it's okay. It's not okay. What you did to the cafe, the reviews, the campaign, it cost me real money and real fear and real hours I don't have. She paused. And what you did 6 years ago costs me something that doesn't have a number. I know. I'm not forgiving you tonight. Maybe not ever. That's not something I'm going to promise. I'm not asking you to. Good. She turned the flame back on low. But I'm done carrying it. That's different from forgiving. I'm putting it down and I'm walking away from it. What you do with the rest of your life is not my business and not my problem. A breath on the line, something that might have been the sound of a person releasing something they had been holding for a long time. Nadia, Sienna said. Yeah, I'm sorry. It came out without architecture, without the careful construction of an apology designed to be convincing. Just the words, stripped of everything else. I am genuinely, completely sorry. Nadia looked at the steam coming from the pot. I heard you, she said. She ended the call. She stood in the kitchen for 30 seconds. Then she finished making dinner and called Elias in from his room, and they ate at the kitchen table with the ordinary companionable noise of a child and a parent sharing a meal. And Elias told her about something that had happened during recess, involving a contested rule in a game she didn't fully understand. And she listened with her full attention, asking the right questions. And by the time they were done and the dishes were in the sink, and Elias was in the bath, the call with Sienna had settled into the part of her mind where things went when they were finished, rather than when they were merely over. There was a difference. She was learning to know the difference. Sienna's retraction went live the following morning at 8:47. It was longer than Nadia had expected, and more specific than she had required. Sienna named herself clearly, described the campaign in detail, stated unambiguously that the accusations against Ember and Pine were fabricated, and acknowledged that the motivation had been personal, rather than anything resembling public concern. Marlo had reviewed and approved the language the previous night. It was, legally and practically, everything the cease and desist had demanded. Within the hour, the fraudulent reviews began disappearing from the platforms that had hosted them, removed under the documented pressure that Marlo had been applying since the suit was filed. 2 of the platforms issued brief public acknowledgments of their removal. One sent Nadia a form email. The third did nothing, which Marlo noted for the record. By afternoon, the accounts were suspended. By evening, a statement from the Regional Hospitality Board confirmed that Nadia's award nomination remained in full standing, and that the association was satisfied with the resolution of the documented campaign. Nadia read it in the back office. She put her phone face down on the desk. She sat for a moment in the particular quiet that follows the end of something that has been loud for a long time. It did not feel triumphant. She had known it wouldn't. Triumph required an enemy worth celebrating the defeat of, and what Sienna had turned out to be was not an enemy, but a person so consumed by the specific poison of comparison that she had destroyed 2 relationships and her own professional standing trying to eliminate the evidence that someone else's life was going better than hers. That wasn't an enemy. That was a cautionary story. Nadia opened the desk drawer. She took out the sheet of paper that Sienna's handwritten apology letter, which had arrived by mail 3 days after the public retraction, occupied. She had read it twice. It was 4 pages long, written in the slightly cramped handwriting she recognized, from 11 years of birthday cards and grocery lists left on café tables and notes slipped under dorm room doors. She read it once more. Then she put it back in the drawer. She closed the drawer. She went back to work. The federal process, when it became visible, was not the explosion she had anticipated. It was more like a controlled demolition, precise, documented, piece by piece. Jun's cooperation with federal investigators became public knowledge on a Thursday morning, reported first in a Pacific Northwest business publication, and then picked up by larger outlets as the day progressed. The reporting was factual and detailed. It named Sao Meridian's history with accuracy. It named Jun without the breathless framing of a crime story, because the story, as it turned out, was not primarily about crime. It was about the voluntary, proactive dismantling of a criminal infrastructure by the man who had maintained it, in cooperation with authorities, in exchange for a negotiated resolution that would allow the legitimate operations of the company to survive. John's name was in the news for 9 days. Nadia's name appeared in 2 articles, in both cases in the context of the Sienna campaign, described as a local small business owner and hospitality award recipient who had been the subject of a defamation scam with connections to interests opposed to Jun's cooperation. The framing was not inaccurate. It was also not complete, but she had not expected complete. She did not comment publicly. Marlowe advised against it, and she agreed with the advice. During those 9 days, Ember and Pine opened every morning at 6:45 and closed every evening on schedule, and Nadia ran the operation with the same methodical attention she always had. A few customers asked her about the articles. She answered directly and briefly and without drama, and the directness of her answers tended to close the topic faster than evasion would have. Rosa handled the staff questions with the particular skill of someone who had worked for Nadia long enough to understand what her boss wanted modeled, which was professionalism and normalcy, and the absolute refusal to let external noise change the quality of the work. On the 5th day, Caleb came in, not to order coffee this time. He came in just after the morning rush, when the cafe was quieter, and he stood at the counter with his hands in his jacket pockets and the specific posture of a man who had rehearsed what he wanted to say and was no longer certain the rehearsal was adequate. "Can we talk?" he said. Nadia looked at him. "I have 20 minutes, she said. Not unkindly, just factually. They sat at the small table near the window that Elias used for homework. Tadzia set 2 coffees on the table, the good ones, not the automated version, the ones she made herself because some conversations deserved the best version of the thing. Caleb wrapped both hands around the cup. He looked at it. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what I cost you." He looked up. Not the obvious things. The other things. The years. His voice was steady, but it cost him something. She could see the cost of it. "Elias doesn't know my face." "No," she said, "I want to fix that." "You can't fix it," she said. "You can't get those years back. They're gone. What you can do is be consistent from now forward." She held his gaze. "That means showing up when you say you'll show up. Not when it's convenient, or when you feel the guilt strongly enough to act on it, but you said you would, whether you feel like it that day or not. I know. And it means understanding that Elias doesn't owe you anything. He doesn't owe you affection, or acceptance, or the performance of a father-son relationship, because you need that to feel resolved. He's 6. His only job is to be 6, she paused. Your job is to be someone worth knowing. That takes time. Possibly a lot of time. Caleb looked at the table. He nodded slowly, not the quick nod of someone agreeing to end a difficult conversation, but the considered movement of a person accepting something heavy. "How do I start?" he said. I'll call you this Saturday, she said. Elias has a thing in the morning. In the afternoon, if you're available, you can come to the park with us. Not as an event, not as a significant moment, just as a person who shows up. He looked up. Just showing up, he said. For now, she said. That's all. He picked up his coffee. He drank it. He set it down. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me, she said. Thank him. Eventually, when you've earned the right to. He left. Nadia sat for a moment at the table after he was gone. She looked at the chair across from her, the ones Elias used, with the slight scuff on the back leg where he always hooked his foot. She thought about what she had just done, and she tested it against herself the way she tested everything, not for whether it felt right, because feeling and right were not the same measurement, but for whether it was consistent with the kind of person she had decided to be. She was not giving Caleb back what he had thrown away. She was giving her son the chance to know his father, if his father turned out to be someone worth knowing. Those were entirely different things. She went back behind the counter. June came in that afternoon. He did not look like a man who had spent 9 days in the news. He looked like himself, composed, unhurried, slightly tired, in a way that was new but wore well on him, the tiredness of a person who has done something difficult and is on the other side of it rather than in the middle. He ordered a cortado. She made it. She brought it to the counter and set it down and looked at him. Ellen says the primary cooperation phase is complete, he said. I know, she called Marlowe. The restructuring will take another 8 months minimum. There will be additional reporting. He paused. My name will come up again. I know that too. He looked at her steadily. I owe you an honest accounting of what the last several months cost you because of decisions I made before I had the right to make them near you. June, let me say it. She was quiet. I sat in your café for months because it was the only place I went where nothing was required of me except to be present. I came back because of you, your steadiness, the way you run this place, what you built. He held her gaze. And in doing that, I put my world next to yours without fully disclosing what my world was. I told myself the risk was managed. I was wrong about the risk, and I was wrong to make that calculation without your knowledge. He paused. I'm sorry. She looked at him for a moment. I know, she said. That's not forgiveness. No, she agreed. It's acknowledgement. Forgiveness takes longer. Something in his expression shifted. Not relief, something more careful than relief. The face of a man who was not expecting mercy and was learning to sit with the version of things that was available instead. I'm rebuilding the company, he said. It will be smaller. It will be legitimate. Some of the people I've worked with for years will not be part of what comes next. He looked at the counter. I don't know what I'm building yet, exactly. I know what I'm not building. That's a start, she said. He looked up. Is it enough? He stopped. To what? He held her gaze. To still come in. The question was simpler than anything they had said to each other in weeks. It sat in the air between them without the architecture of everything else, without the federal investigation and the rival organization and the real estate interest, and the 11 years of history Nadia carried, that had nothing to do with him, and everything to do with how carefully she had learned to assess the cost of trust. She looked at him. She thought about Elias saying he doesn't act different when you're not looking. She thought about 11 minutes on a wet sidewalk in the rain, and the specific quality of a man who, when given the choice between protecting himself and telling the truth, had finally, after 15 years, chosen the truth. Not perfectly, not without cost, not without having been the thing he was for a long time before he stopped being it. But he had chosen it. Yes, she said. You can still come in. He nodded once. He picked up his cortado. He went to his table. And the cafe went on around them, Rosa, calling out an order, the bell above the door sounding as a customer left. The particular warm, ambient noise of a place that had been built to be exactly what it was. And Nadia went back to work with the quiet efficiency of someone who had more to do and the capacity to do it. The weeks that followed were not peaceful exactly. Peace suggested an absence of difficulty. And there was still difficulty. The lawsuit against Sienna moved through its process with the unhurried machinery of the legal system extracting from both sides the documentation and depositions and correspondence that legal processes required. The Seo Meridian restructuring generated additional news cycles. The real estate interest behind Rhee's arrangement with Sienna surfaced in the federal documentation, and two individuals connected to that interest received their own legal attention in a process entirely separate from and simultaneous with everything else. None of it was quiet, but it was moving in the direction of resolution, and Nadia had enough experience with the difference between chaos and managed complexity to recognize which one she was inside. She recognized it because she had built Ember and Pine inside managed complexity. She had raised Elias inside it. She had run her consulting business inside it. The presence of difficulty had never been her problem. Her problem, for years, had been allowing other people's choices to become the terms of her difficulty. She was done with that particular problem. On a Saturday in late September, Nadia took Elias to Gasworks Park. The afternoon was one of those Pacific Northwest autumn days that arrived like an apology for the rain, clear and cool, and lit with the specific quality of September sun that made everything look like it had been considered before being placed. The park was full in the easy way that parks are full on good weather days. Families and dogs and people lying on blankets reading, the ordinary pleasantness of a city enjoying a reprieve. Caleb was already there when they arrived. He was sitting on a bench near the path, not the picnic area, not the obvious meeting spot, just a bench, slightly removed from the main activity, which Nadia noted as the first evidence that he had thought about this, more than he had thought about most things involving her, and done something with the thinking. Elias had been told, in terms appropriate for a 6-year-old, that there was a person who wanted to meet him who was connected to him in a specific way. She had not used the word father, not yet. That word carried a weight that had to be earned before it could be given, and Caleb had not yet earned it. Elias had said, "Is he nice?" Nadia had said, "I think he's trying to be." Elias had thought about this and said, "That's okay. Trying is how you get to nice." She had looked at her son for a moment and thought about all the things he was going to be when he was grown, and then she had told him to put his jacket on. Caleb stood when he saw them approaching. He looked at Elias. Elias looked at Caleb with the frank, unhurried assessment of a child who had not yet learned to disguise evaluation as politeness. "Hi," Elias said. Caleb said. His voice was careful. Not performing warmth, not overwhelming the moment with it, just there, present, slightly unsteady in the way of a person doing something for the first time. "My mom says you know her from before," Elias said. That's right, Elias considered this. From before me? Yes. Elias processed this information with the philosophical acceptance of a child for whom chronology was still a relatively new concept. "Okay," he said. "And then, do you like dogs? There's a lot of dogs here today." "I do like dogs," Caleb said. "Come see," Elias said, and walked toward the park without waiting to see if he would be followed. Caleb looked at Nadia. She said nothing. He followed her son toward the dogs. Nadia watched them go. She sat on the bench Caleb had vacated, and she tilted her face up towards the September sun, and she let herself feel, without managing or assessing or strategizing, the particular quality of this moment. The specific texture of a Saturday afternoon, in a park, where her son was walking ahead of her, and the worst of what had been coming for months had largely come and largely passed, and the thing she had built was still standing and still hers. She let herself feel it, not triumph, not relief, something quieter and more specific than either of those. The feeling of a person who has done the hard thing and is sitting briefly in the space after. June arrived at 4, not because she had asked him to. She had mentioned, a few days earlier, that they were going to the park on Saturday afternoon, and he had said nothing about it, and she had thought nothing of it. And he had appeared at 4 o'clock in the specific unhurried way that he appeared everywhere, with his hands in his coat pockets and his attention moving briefly over the scene, before settling. Elias saw him before Nadia did. He came running back across the grass, Caleb a few steps behind, slightly winded, with the slightly dazed expression of a man who had just spent 40 minutes running after a 6-year-old and was discovering that this required a different kind of fitness than he currently possessed. "June," Elias announced, arriving at full speed and stopping. There's a dog over there with 3 legs, and it runs the same as the other dogs. Did you know they can do that? I did know that, June said. It doesn't even look different when it runs. Elias said, with the specific emphasis of someone reporting a fact they find philosophically significant. June nodded. Sometimes what's missing doesn't change what something is capable of. Elias stared at him. Yeah, he said, as if this confirmed something he had been working on. Then he turned and ran back toward the dogs. Caleb had stopped a few feet away. He looked at Jun. Jun looked at Caleb. There was a moment brief, specific, the kind that doesn't require narration. In a room full of people who understand Mitsnising, who understand what they are witnessing, where the 2 men in Nadia's life assessed each other with the direct simplicity of people who had no particular reason to be. Enemies and no particular reason to be anything else. Then Caleb nodded once. Jun nodded back. Caleb put his hands in his pockets and went back to following Elias. Jun sat on the bench beside Nadia. They watched Elias for a while without talking. The park went on around them. The light moved, the way September light moves quickly, aware of its own temporariness, casting long shadows well before the sun was actually low. How is the restructuring, she said. Slower than I expected. Faster than I feared. He paused. Ellen says the clean version of the company will be operational within 6 months. What does the clean version look like? Smaller. Pacific Freight, documentation on everything, no side arrangements of any kind. He looked at the park. I'll have to rebuild relationships I damaged by exiting. Some of them won't rebuild. He was quiet for a moment. It turns out that doing the right thing late is still doing the right thing, but it does not carry the same rewards as doing it on time. No, she agreed. It doesn't. He glanced at her. Are you going to say something wise about that? No, she said. He almost smiled. They were quiet again. A dog ran past, not the 3-legged one. A different dog, entirely whole and entirely unaware of its own completeness. I want to ask you something, Jun said. Okay, what do you want? He said it without preamble or qualification. Not from the legal situation. Not from the investigation. Not from Caleb, or from what happened with Sienna. He looked at her. From here forward, what do you want? Nadia looked at the park. At Elias, who had found the 3-legged dog again and was crouching beside it with the reverent attention he brought to anything he found genuinely interesting. At Caleb, who was standing a few feet away with his hands in his pockets and his face turned toward his son, with the expression of a man slowly understanding what he had thrown away and even more slowly beginning to understand that the understanding itself was the beginning of something rather than the end. She thought about a kitchen table 6 years ago, 2 cold coffees, a positive test, the specific feeling of a future collapsing without making a sound. She thought about the night she had sat on a hospital parking garage floor and cried for 4 minutes and then stood up and gone back upstairs. She thought about Ember and Pine's door opening. For the first time on a Tuesday morning in March, 3 people walking in, the espresso machine running, the beginning of everything that had come after. I want to expand, she said. Jun turned his head. Not a chain, she said. Not a franchise. Something else. A second location, maybe. Somewhere in the city that needs what Pioneer Square has. A community. A place. She paused. And I want to be done spending energy on things that are over. Sienna's, he said. And everything before Sienna, she said. All the things I've been carrying that stopped belonging to me a long time ago. She looked at the park. I've been building on top of the weight of it. I want to build without it. Jun was quiet for a moment. What else? He said. She looked at him. He looked back. There was a quality to the looking not romantic exactly, or not only that, but something more foundational than romance. The specific regard of 2 people who had been tested in the same season and had seen each other at their worst and their most honest, and had arrived at this park bench on this September afternoon, though about what either of them was. I want to see how you rebuild, she said. I want to see if the man you're trying to become is who I think he is. She held his gaze. I'm not promising anything. I'm saying I want to see. That's enough, he said. It's what I have. It's enough, he said again. And he meant it, which was the thing about June that she had understood, long before she understood, The rest of him, he said what he meant, and he meant what he said, and in her experience, that was rarer than any other quality a person could have. The afternoon wound down, the way good afternoons wind down without announcement. Gradually, the light going amber, and then lower. The park thinning out as people gathered their things and their children and their dogs and went back toward whatever waited at home. Elias came back when he was called. He was dirty in the particular complete way of children who have spent 2 hours doing exactly what they wanted, and he was carrying a small stone he had found near the water and wanted to keep. It's white, he told June, holding it up, with a gray line through the middle. Jun looked at the stone. That line is where the pressure changed when the rock was forming, he said. 2 different kinds of material, pressed together long enough to become one thing. Elias turned the stone in his small fingers. So it's both things, he said. It's both things, June confirmed. Elias pocketed the stone with that satisfaction of someone who has just received an answer that clarifies something they were already thinking about. Caleb crouched down to Elias's level. I'll see you next time, he said. Careful. No promises beyond what he could keep. Nadia heard this and noted it as the first evidence of the change she was cautiously watching for. Okay, Elias said. He thought for a moment. Did you know a dog with 3 legs runs the same as a regular dog? I did not know that, Caleb said. Thank you for telling me. You're welcome, Elias said, with grave sincerity. And then he took Nadia's hand and tugged in the direction of the car. Caleb stood. He looked at Nadia. Saturday, she said. Not a question. A reminder. He nodded Saturday. He walked the other way. Nadia walked toward the parking lot with Elias's hand in hers, and June a few steps to her right. At the car, Elias climbed in and occupied himself immediately with the stone from his pocket, turning it in the window light to look at the gray line through the middle. Nadia stood at the driver's door for a moment. You know, she said, not quite to June and not quite to herself, I've been thinking about what I'd do differently. If I could go back, change something. June waited. I can't find anything, she said. Not because everything was good. A lot of it was hard, and a lot of it was unfair, and I would not wish some of it on anyone. She looked at the car where her son was studying his stone. But everything that happened made what I have, and what I have is real. She looked at Jun. I don't want a different version. I want this one. Jun looked at her. Then keep it, he said. She got in the car. She drove home through Seattle in the late September evening, the city going golden around them. Elias talking about the stone and the dog, and asking 3 separate questions about what happened to rocks when they were under pressure for a very long time, and Nadia answered each one as honestly as she could, because that was the only way she knew how to do anything. Later, after Elias was in bed with the stone on his nightstand, and the apartment was quiet, Nadia stood in the kitchen for a moment. The light was on above the stove. The window showed the city dark and lit, rain starting again, Seattle being exactly what it was. She stood there in the ordinary quiet of her own life. She was 37 years old. She had a 6-year-old son who could almost read chapter books and had strong opinions about breakfast and thought that trying was how you got to nice. She had a café that had survived 4 years and a smear campaign and the specific slow violence of financial uncertainty and come out the other side of all of it still serving the best cortado in Pioneer Square. She had a lawyer who answered on the 3rd ring and an employee who set up alerts on keywords and a neighbor who picked up her son without being asked. She had a man across the city who was in the process of choosing, slowly and at great cost, to become someone different from who he had been, and she was watching to see if he could do it, and she was not promising anything, and she was watching anyway. And she had herself, which she had learned. The hard way, and the long way, was the only foundation that didn't require someone else's loyalty to hold. She turned off the kitchen light. She went to bed. Through the window, Seattle went on doing what cities do indifferent to individual stories, full of them anyway, lit from within by the accumulated glow of thousands of lives being lived in their various complicated, unfinished, imperfect ways. In Pioneer Square, the sign above the cafe door held the dark. Ember and pine, still lit, still standing, still hers.